Chapter 201. The young masters continued to talk about what they were talking about before. Someone asked, "Brother Hay, how did you get to know that Hellion family's young lady? Before, she was clearly only interested in the air. How come now she even knows what you like to eat and what you want so clearly?" Haze smiled. The corners of his mouth curved. "What does this have to do with you guys? Do what you should do. Don't touch that pearl of mine, understand?" "Understood. We understand very well." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. At this time, Eunuch's son had already changed the teacup and wanted to bring it to his master. Only then did he discover that his palm was tightly holding the remaining brittle pieces, which had already overflowed with many beads of blood. Eunuch's son subconsciously cried out in alarm. He saw that Beligaju seemed to be tired of it. He slightly lifted his sleeve and unhurriedly wiped the dirt from his palm. He casually threw the white handkerchief to the side and also didn't go to that cup of tea in Eunuch's son's hand. His expression was indifferent, as if the injured person wasn't him. Eunuch's son also didn't dare to say anything and put that teacup to the side. Listening to the young masters chatting and laughing, his whole body felt uncomfortable. It wasn't because of anything else, but because from the beginning, that smile on the corners of His Highness's mouth hadn't fallen. "Let's go to the front hall and take a look." Retired Emperor's face carried a wise smile as he turned his head and said, "Presumably, you guys also want to know what those girls are wishing for." Many of the young masters from influential families blushed. After all, no matter how mature they were still teenagers. It was impossible to say that they didn't have a girl they liked in their hearts. As they walked, the bamboo forest swayed and a cool breeze blew. They didn't feel the slightest bit hot and were very leisurely and comfortable. Hellion Vivian didn't go in with Hellion Jiaoer and the others to pray for fortune, but she also couldn't delay the journey. She simply sat under the locust tree at the entrance of the hall. Her body was half leaning, and the softest snow petals in the forest swayed. Occasionally, 2 pieces fell on the back of her hand. The scene was extremely beautiful. When the young masters walked over, they saw this scene. Their footsteps paused as they were somewhat stunned. Seeing this situation, He-Eyes was afraid that the retired emperor would blame her, so he reminded her, "Why are you here?" Only then did Hellion Vivian open her eyes. She lazily grunted. When she saw the group of people behind Haze gradually walking over, she quietly stood up. She was polite and good-looking, but she wasn't close to them. The retired emperor hadn't seen this side yet. He was looking sideways at the flourishing incense burning on the other side. He-Eyes lowered his eyes. "Follow us in later. If you stay outside and someone sees you, they will accuse you of not following the rules." "All right." Hellion Wei yawned. The corners of her eyes were still tired. She raised her head and met with Bailey Jiaju's icy-cold gaze. Hellion Vivian didn't know what he was looking at. He just stared at her without blinking, his eyes as deep as a frosty well. Perhaps it had been maintained for too long. Even the young masters of influential families standing at the side quieted down. They looked at Beligaju, then looked at Hellion Vivian. They felt that something was strange. Hellion Vivian also felt her scalp go numb from the man's gaze. She was looking for an opportunity to avert her gaze. She heard the retired emperor laugh. "Isn't this that girl from the Hellion family? What? You're not going to pray for blessings? This humble girl is going." Hellion Vivian bowed as she spoke and was about to leave. The retired emperor was rather open-minded. "All right, you don't need to go by yourself. Come in with us."
"Yes."
Hellion Vivian didn't care. In any case, she'd go in later. She'd just shake the lot pot twice. She didn't need to pray for blessings or whatever. After the retired emperor finished speaking, he turned his head and led a group of young masters into the hall. Hellion Vivian wanted to follow behind them and hide in peace. Only, she didn't expect that Beligaju's footsteps would be so slow. The 2 people walked, one in front, one behind. Beligaju also didn't speak. That cold expression of his seemed as if he didn't recognize her. Hellion Vivian played with the armament component in her hand. She actually didn't care about Beligaju's attitude. Just as she was about to go up the steps, the person in front seemed to have stopped. She suddenly heard him say in a low voice, "You're actually very good to Haze." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't understand why the third prince would suddenly say such a thing. When her gaze met the man's in midair, she only saw that pair of eyes were so cold that there was almost no warmth. The surrounding air also followed and condensed a few degrees. As his white robe and long sleeves swayed, Hellion Vivian looked at that cold and tall figure from behind. She was slightly perplexed. Eunuch's son ran over and whispered in her ear, "Eldest miss, please bear with him. His Highness isn't in a good mood today." Hellion Vivian wanted to say that she could tell, but she didn't know why. Eunuch's son also didn't have time to say more. He followed in 2 or 3 steps. In the hall, one could faintly hear the shaking of the lot pot. One sound after another, very long. The servant girls all held their breaths as they stood, not daring to move carelessly. They were afraid that if they made a sound, they would disturb the peace and quiet and affect their own master's fate. By the time Hellion Vivian and the others walked in, those young ladies had already taken the lot sticks in their hands and were standing to one side. They wanted to say something but hesitated. They wanted their master to interpret their own divinations. When they raised their eyes and saw the retired emperor leading the young masters in, they were first stunned. Then, they gripped the wooden lot sticks in their hands. Their faces were dyed crimson. One after another, they bowed in salute. The retired emperor waved his sleeve to let them continue. He also brought head abbot Fangzhong over and let him interpret one of the people's divinations. One must know that it wasn't that easy to interpret a divination at the Hidden Spirit Temple. This temple was famous for only interpreting 3 divinations a day. No matter how much power you had, it was still impossible to do more. But one couldn't help but admit that the divinations at the Hidden Spirit Temple were indeed very effective. There were many high officials and nobles in the capital who spared no effort and traveled for several days just to wait for these 3 divinations in the morning. Therefore, when they heard that the abbot Fangzhong would be the one to interpret the divinations, each and every one of the young ladies holding the wooden lot looked forward to it. After all, the abbot Fangzhong didn't easily perform divinations. If they wanted to get 1 or 2 words of advice from him, it would be extremely difficult. It could be said that this time, it was really convenient for them. Everyone took out the lot they had drawn. Although they didn't say what they were praying for, everyone knew that 8 or 9 times out of 10, they were praying for marriage. When the Hellion Jiaoer handed over her wooden lot, she turned her small face to look at Beligaju. Her eyes swayed, carrying a bashful expression, but also appearing very well behaved. Naturally, she stood to his left. When the servant girl saw her actions, the light in her eyes carried satisfaction. Her family's young miss was too reserved before. Now, she finally knew how to take the initiative. Very good, very good. Some of the young masters also saw this scene. Their eyes flashed with obvious sadness. Hellion Vivian was still standing there, pondering how she had provoked the 3rd imperial prince. Then, she heard Hei say, "Woman, you also go draw a lot." Chapter 202. I'm not interested in marriage. Hellion Vivian speaks the truth. Heize looks at her like he's looking at a monster. An abnormal woman. Hellion Vivian lazily looks at him, better than someone who doesn't even dare to admit who he likes. Heize is immediately stuck. Hey, can we still have a pleasant chat? Although their voices are very low, it's hard to avoid attracting the attention of others, especially since Beligaju hasn't moved his gaze away from the 2 of them from beginning to end. Eunuch's son looks at the smile on His Highness's face. The more he smiles, the more horrifying it becomes. He bluntly opens his mouth. Miss Vivian should also draw a lot. Perhaps you'll be able to get it. Eunuch's son didn't expect that his words would attract everyone's gaze to Hellion Vivian. Head Abbot Fangzhong strokes the white beard on his chin and smiles. This female benefactor should indeed draw a lot. This old monk has stayed in the temple for so many years, but this is the first time I've seen such a good husband's appearance. Her life is full of wisdom. She can turn misfortune into luck. Her eyebrows are full of righteousness. She should be a very rich and noble person. Everyone is astonished by the abbot's words. It must be known that Hellion Vivian has just been driven out of the defense department. Right now, her body can be considered to be empty. If it weren't for the fact that she won this time's competition within the academy, how could there be a place for her in this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple? Why is it that in the abbot's mouth, she's a very rich and noble person? However, to be able to make the abbot personally open his mouth to read a person's fortune, there probably aren't many people in the world. Could it be that this Hellion Vivian will be able to make a comeback in the future? The aristocratic young masters all have doubtful gazes. Hellion Jower is so hateful that she crumples her handkerchief, her teeth fiercely biting her thin lips. Her pair of eyes are like poisoned arsenic, but when she lowers her eyes, it's exquisitely concealed. However, at the beginning, head abbot Fengzhong only became interested in this girl Hellion Vivian after hearing the royal's words. But when he really looked at her, he felt that her appearance was indeed a little different from the rest. He continued, "As for the rest, we will have to wait for the female benefactor to draw the lot." Hellion Vivian calmly accepted the gazes cast from all around. She faced head abbot Fengzhong and smiled politely. "Many thanks for great master's good intentions. It's Wei Wei who doesn't have Buddhist affinity. I'm used to being carefree, and I've always believed in one thing. My life is my own, not up to the heavens." Suddenly, there was a momentary pause in the hall. Everyone looked at Hellion Vivian with an indescribable gaze. Only Beligaju seemed to be curling his thin lips as he slowly adjusted his sleeves. Head abbot Fengzhong stared blankly for a moment before bursting into loud laughter. That laughter reverberated within the palace hall and didn't fade away for a long time. Worthy of being the Hellion family's bloodline. How could a golden carp not be a fish in a pond? Encountering a storm, one will transform into a dragon. Hellion Vivian, the future you truly make this old monk look forward to it. I'll be relying on Abbot Fengzhang's auspicious words. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Her indifference to honor and disgrace made retired emperor raise his eyebrows. Head abbot Fengzhang glanced at Beligaju, who wasn't too far away. A profound meaning was written all over his face. No wonder this icy fellow took a fancy to this girl. There were many people who believed in Buddhism under the heavens, yet they didn't understand the cause and effect. How could this Hellion Vivian not have Buddhist affinity? Clearly, her heart didn't have any fear. Her comprehension was more thorough than others. She was actually very suitable for this cold and emotionless icy fellow. Retired emperor finally figured it out. Perhaps it was also because of this point. Beligaju actually didn't look at him. His pair of eyes were downcast, making people unable to see any emotion. The Hellion Jower was listening from the side. Her entire heart twisted, but her face was still brimming with a smiling expression. Only, in a place where no one was around, her pair of hands were clenched until they were somewhat deformed. The servant girl didn't know what to say and could only move her hands and feet. She moved the Buddhist lot that belonged to the Hellion Jower to the front. Head abbot Fengzhang smiled as he picked up one of the Buddhist lots. In a few words, he solved the hexagram. The Hellion Jower's lot was the best lot. It was also the only good lot among the young ladies of the aristocratic families. It attracted everyone's exclamations. The best lot indeed wasn't easy to find. It could be seen how good the Hellion Jower's fate was. Head abbot Fengzhang took that lot and solved the hexagram. The first part was actually good, but towards the end, it was somewhat vague. But one couldn't help but admit that the Hellion Jower's hexagram was the best out of all of them. The young ladies of the aristocratic families, who previously had thoughts of guarding against the Hellion Jower, once again looked towards this side. Their eyes were filled with envy. The servant girl by the Hellion Jower's side raised her chin very high. As if on purpose, she swept a glance in the direction of the Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian wasn't so idle that she would bicker with a little servant girl. Her eyes stared at the corner of the Buddhist statue, and her shapely eyebrows raised. Some people just can't find the best lot. They don't even dare to touch the lot pot. Women, even if they didn't want to admit it, but they really did have the mentality of stepping on the low and bullying the high. They liked to see others make a fool of themselves. When added with jealousy, they couldn't help but want to talk when they met. Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her lips, as if she didn't place this kind of provocation in her eyes at all. The servant girl standing by the Hellion Jower's side also couldn't put up with it. Recently, because of that little slut Hellion Vivian, she had suffered quite a bit of anger. Now, she seized the opportunity and said in a strange tone, "Isn't that so? I'm just afraid that I'll draw the worst lot." When the Hellion Jiaoer heard this, she pretended to reprimand. "Go away. You really don't know the rules more and more." The servant girl shrank her shoulders, but when she saw that there wasn't a trace of displeasure on her Mrs. face, she knew that she had taken this step with Mrs. Hart. "Big sister, you don't need to bicker with these servants," the Hellion Jiaoer gently said. "I thought a lot about yesterday's matter. Mother also taught me that in the future, I must love Big Sister. Just now, even the abbot said that Big Sister's fate is extraordinary. If you touch the lot pot and ruin your fate, it won't be good." When Yuan Ming woke up, he just happened to hear this sentence. He smiled wickedly. "Woman, she is provoking you. If I were you, I definitely wouldn't tolerate it. And if I were you, I wouldn't come out at this time. This is a Buddhist place." When Hellion Vivian smiled, it was easy to think of the word devil. Yuan Ming coldly snorted. "The reason why this venerable is afraid of these Buddha statues is because this venerable hasn't completely recovered yet. Wait until this venerable recovers. This venerable will crush all of these things. I don't know who it is, but when he just entered the temple, he hid in the Xuanhuan space," Hellion Vivian said indifferently. Yuan Ming curved his thin lips. "Woman, the one that is being looked down upon right now isn't this venerable, it's you." "Looked down upon?" Hellion Wei's beautiful phoenix-shaped eyes looked up and strolled to the front of the pot. She picked up a row of unfolded wooden sticks and put all of them into the pot. The Hellion Jiaoer's red lips were half raised. She was waiting to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. One must know that it wasn't that this little slut had never drawn a lot before. Every time she drew a bad lot, it had never changed even after 10 years. This time, just wait for her to lose face. Chapter 203. Voila! Hellion Vivian's left hand held the bamboo pot, casually shaking it. Her movements weren't as pious as the other young ladies, but it carried an indescribable handsomeness. Eunuch Sun sighed and muttered in a low voice, "Why doesn't this look like a drawing of lots, but more like shaking a sieve cup?" Hearing this, Bailey Jiaju raised his eyes. A trace of light flashed through his indifferent eyes, faintly discernible. Letting Hellion Vivian fiddle with these bamboo pots, and such was really a bit difficult for her. She casually assumed the posture of entering a casino, shaking it a few times. After getting the feeling, she raised her white hand. The wooden lot fell down. The little monk standing at the side presented that wooden lot to Abbot Fangzhong. Abbot Fangzhong looked at that lot and laughed heartily. "Wonderful, wonderful." "Oh?" Retired Emperor made a sound. After receiving that lot, he raised his eyebrows in astonishment. Hellion Jiaoer realized that something was wrong, suddenly looking towards Hellion Vivian. She saw that she was smiling at her, shaking the bamboo pot in her hand again, with an appearance full of evil aura. Pa! The second lot fell down. This divination was truly perfect. At this time, even the little monk was a bit unsettled after seeing the lot on top. He couldn't help but take another look at Hellion Vivian. Both are the best of the best. Abbot Fangzhong stroked his beard. "This is rare. Both are the best of the best." There was an uproar in the main hall, looking at each other in dismay. When they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a faint trace of envy and admiration. The servant girl standing by Hellion Jiaoer's side was stunned, subconsciously looking at her young lady's face. Sure enough, it was ashen. How could this be? The servant girl's entire body was a bit silly, because in the past, they used to mock the eldest young lady about drawing lots. At that time, the eldest young lady would follow the other young ladies to the temple every year. The young ladies loathed her, but she didn't know. When it came to drawing lots, she was more active than anyone else, afraid that others wouldn't know that she admired the heir. What she drew lots for was a predestined marriage. Every time she drew lots, she would lose face, making a lot of jokes. What was wrong with this little bitch today? How could a person's fate be changed? How come she had never heard of such a thing? Hellion Jiaoer clenched her fists. No matter how unwilling she was, she had to force a smile. Hellion Vivian was straightforward. When she passed by Hellion Jiaoer, she suddenly leaned over and gently patted the dust off her shoulder. She spoke in a voice that was neither too low nor too loud, as if she didn't care if others heard her. Her voice was clear and long. "Sister? What do you think? Does your face hurt?" Such an inexplicable sentence made the people around him somewhat unable to understand. However, the Hellion Giaour understood. Her little face completely stiffened, and the forced smile disappeared from the corners of her mouth. There was a hint of malevolence in her usually delicate eyes. Hellion Vivian didn't care about her. She returned to her original position. She was still as relaxed and indolent as before. Hellion Giaour twisted a handkerchief. She looked like she couldn't wait to eat Hellion Vivian. Come to think of it, if Hellion Vivian didn't say anything after drawing the best lot, perhaps Hellion Giaour wouldn't feel so shameful. From the beginning, the people who understood could see that this Hellion Giaour clearly wanted to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. In the end, not only did Hellion Vivian not make a fool of herself, she even drew 2 of the best lots in the lot pot. This was even better than Hellion Giaour's divination. Hellion Giaour was originally fuming in her heart, but Hellion Vivian actually asked her if her face hurt. This was the rhythm of angering people to death. When head abbot Fengzhang saw this scene, he used all his strength to look at Bailey Jiaju. His meaning seemed to be saying, "How come the person you fancy has the same appearance as you? Don't open your mouth, don't open your mouth. Once you open your mouth, you can be choked to death by a living person." Baligaju indifferently looked back at him. "What? You have an opinion?" Head abbot Fengzhang silently looked at the sky. What opinion could he have? He just wanted to ask him, where did he find such a girl? In this world, it's also very hard to find someone with such a venomous tongue like the royal family. Baligaju didn't look at head abbot Fengzhang again. His pair of eyes only sunk, without the slightest trace of a smile in them. Head abbot Fengzhang followed his gaze and saw Hellion Vivian tilting her head to talk to Hazy. No one heard what they were saying. He saw Hazy smile at her, with a doting appearance that said he couldn't do anything to her. Crack. Head abbot Fengzhang heard the small Buddha statue by his hand forcibly crack. He deeply wrinkled his white brows. He seemed to have thought of this matter too simply before. No, it's not him. It's them. They've always wanted such a person by His Highness's side, the most suitable person. But they never thought that perhaps that person would be unwilling. But with His Highness's temperament, the things he wants, he must obtain. Moreover, he must obtain them completely. In other words, this thing had to be completely clean. It doesn't matter if he's currently treating Hellion Vivian as prey, or if he's only a little bit interested in her. Once Hellion Vivian has a relationship with another man, he's really afraid that His Highness will do something. For example, destroying Hellion Vivian. The more head abbot Fengzhang thought, the more worried he became. He glanced to the side and exchanged a glance with retired emperor. Sure enough, retired emperor was thinking the same thing as him. That's because one could see the helplessness on his face. Head abbot Fengzhang could imagine that if there were no other people around, retired emperor would definitely press his forehead. The crucial point is, His Highness never cared about others, even himself. He must obtain what he wants, and he doesn't care about the cost. The harder it is to obtain, the more he'll be interested in it. This is what gives retired emperor and head abbot Fengzhang a headache. Because according to the current situation, they already can't stop him. Indifference, elegance, and grace, these are only his outer clothes. Once this outer layer is removed, he'll bring about a destructive power that no one can estimate. Just like that year's fire, no one knows how many people he slaughtered. This is also a worry that has been pressing down on retired emperor's heart for many years. He and retired emperor don't know how he, who hasn't reached adulthood yet, survived that fire. But when they saw a youth who hasn't reached adulthood yet sitting on the throne with an indifferent expression, with countless corpses piled up behind him, other than rejoicing, there's also fear that surges out from their hearts. Since that time, retired emperor was worried that His Highness would walk on the path of the devil. Fortunately, when His Highness woke up, he wasn't any different from usual. Only, his temperament became more and more indifferent, and his disguise also became more and more flawless. Everyone thought that he was handsome and harmless, but they've never seen his smile that isn't a smile as he raises his hand to kill people. Chapter 204. Wait, what's going on? Yuan Ming, who was originally peacefully staying in the Xuanhuan space, felt as if his blood vessels were being summoned by something. It was surging and almost manifesting his primordial spirit. He forcefully suppressed his demonic nature and coughed heavily. "Woman, move closer to the Buddha statue." Hellion Vivian frowned. "What's wrong with you?" Knowing Yuan Ming for so long, she had never seen him like this. "I always feel that something is wrong." Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. After waiting until Wei Wei shifted her position, that restlessness unexpectedly disappeared. His expression, which was filled with doubt, sank, bringing out a silence that was different from the past. Hellion Wei Wei didn't have the opportunity to ask Yuan Ming again, because when she shifted, she happened to be behind a certain highness. She didn't even lift her head and bumped into that tall and straight, slightly cold back, as hard as a rock. She wanted to say sorry, but obviously, the people around didn't think it was an accident and had begun to despise her with the eyes of a love-struck fool. Hellion Vivian simply didn't even say sorry, met the man's indifferent eyes, smiled, and wanted to retreat. Unexpectedly, the other side opened his mouth, and there was no fluctuation in the tone, and the tone was cold. "Don't move anymore." When the young ladies heard this, they looked at each other and more or less understood. His Highness was tired of her, otherwise, with His Highness's temperament, how could he speak at this time? It was obvious that he saw through her boring tricks and warned her. Hellion Vivian hummed, and there was nothing to care about standing there. The main thing was that Yuan Xiaoming couldn't wake up again. What was going on? Bailey Jiaju looked at the person standing behind him. She had a fierce expression on her face, and he didn't know what she was thinking about. He suddenly had an urge to reach out and pinch her. Perhaps he wanted to test how thick her skin was. However, this person was the most pleasing to the eye when she stood behind him. Beligaju hooked up his lips, and a smile flashed through his eyes quickly, so that no one could catch it. Hellion Vivian was still fantasizing about shaking Yuan Xiaoming, and she didn't notice the attitude of the royal family. The two of them were clearly standing one in front of the other, but they didn't give off a distant feeling. Perhaps it was because Beligaju's face was slightly tilted to the side. When the sun shone down, it seemed to soften the lines of his jawline, and even his thin lips were glowing. Eunuch Sun watched from the side and more or less understood the situation. He stood to the left to make space for the two of them, deliberately separating Hellion Jiaoer from them. Hellion Jiaoer now hated Hellion Vivian so much that her teeth itched, but she couldn't say anything to Eunuch Sunday. She could only stand there awkwardly. It seemed that they were close, but in fact, there was a person between them. This made her plan to take the opportunity to get close to Beligaju disappear. Hellion Vivian saw that she couldn't wake Yuan Xiaoming up, so she didn't insist. She just wondered what he said before he fell asleep. When she came back to her senses, she saw that Beligaju was looking at her. Hellion Vivian didn't understand the meaning of the royal family. She raised her eyebrows. "You suddenly bumped into me. Do you think this royal highness can understand that you are throwing yourself at me?" His voice was very low. Hellion Vivian wanted to say that all this was a coincidence, but there was no way to explain why she could bump into the back of the third prince in just 2 steps. She felt that her reputation was ruined by the hands of Yuan Xiaoming, a burden. "Your Royal Highness, you think too much." Hellion Vivian smiled, bright eyes and white teeth, the taste of sunshine. Bailey Jiaju's eyes turned cold. "Is that so?" "Yes." Hellion Vivian was afraid that he would misunderstand, so she thought for a moment and added, "I really don't have a crush on you." After hearing this, Beligaju suddenly curved his thin lips. That kind of smile was too devilish, so bright that only Hellion Vivian could see it. There were even stubble of ice in his eyes, as bright as gemstones. Inexplicably, Hellion Vivian felt that she had said something wrong. The meaning was very simple. It was to say that the clouds and mist had dispersed, and the sweetness had come after the bitterness. It was even to the extent of showing off one's ability, which was very much in line with Hellion Vivian's situation. The second stick, however, made head Abbot Fong Zhang stare blankly, because what was written on it was none other than the sentence he had just said. "Isn't a golden carp a fish in a pond? Encountering wind and cloud, it transforms into a dragon." Although at the beginning, he had indeed given Hellion Vivian this kind of evaluation. But generally speaking, when a woman was looking for a stick, it was very rare for her to get this kind of divination. This was simply the best of the best. Head Abbot Fengzhang had no choice but to start sizing up Hellion Vivian again, more or less having some doubts. According to reason, with the rumor of a genius reincarnated Phoenix Girl, she shouldn't have gotten a better stick than Phoenix Girl. In the end, what had gone wrong here? Look at Abbot Fengzhang. What's wrong with him? A sharp-eyed person saw Head Abbot Fengzhang's hesitation. The young master fanning himself guessed. Could it be that the second stick's words aren't good? Sometimes, even if it was the best stick, it still had to be explained by the words of the two sticks. It wasn't that this kind of situation hadn't been encountered when looking for a stick. For example, the first stick's words were very good, but if the second stick's words just happened to clash with it, then even if the two sticks were the best, the result wouldn't be very good. This was the magic of divination. Therefore, what the second stick's words were was very important to the divination. Everyone observed Head Abbot Fengzhang's expression and lightly laughed. It seems that someone is going to be happy for nothing. Let's wait until the divination is solved first. When Hellion Jiao heard that there was a change in the divination, the smile on her face rose again. She just said, "How could an ugly woman who'd run out of luck every time be able to get a better divination than her?" However, when Head Abbot Fengzhang read out the words of the stick word by word, her face instantly sank. This sentence basically didn't need Head Abbot Fengzhang to explain. Everyone could understand. It was because they understood too well that they looked at Hellion Vivian with disbelieving eyes. Before, when Head Abbot Fengzhang said it, they didn't completely believe it. After all, a woman who was expelled from her family, no matter what, could she still flip the heavens? Now that they looked at this stick, for the first time, they began to look at Hellion Vivian seriously. But they didn't know that it was already too late for them to look at her seriously, because they wouldn't have thought that the trash that they thought had just climbed out of the quagmire had already become Profound Heaven's boss. Moreover, her martial chi had already reached level 8, far higher than Hellion Jiao by several levels. The mysterious expert that made the four great clans constantly think about and want to rope in was her. Chapter 205. After praying for marriage, it's time to fulfill the last wish. The imperial family doesn't need to perform a big ceremony like ordinary families to offer incense. Retired emperor only took 3 sticks and bowed towards the main Buddha. He didn't kneel, let alone kowtow. Abbot Fengzhang escorted him all the way down the forest road. Probably because he's still thinking about the wooden lot just now, Abbot Fengzhang's face clearly showed a bit of absent-mindedness. Retired emperor left him behind and let the young ladies of each aristocratic family enter their respective carriages first. What do you think of this, Hellion Vivian? Retired emperor and Abbot Fengzhang walked to the edge of the forest. Looking at that distant figure, they hesitantly opened their mouth. Abbot Fengzhang lowered his eyes, respectfully with a bit of worry. This old monk feels that she's a bit similar to that servant girl by His Highness' side. Probably because it's been too long. This old monk can't say for sure. Retired emperor's eyes sank. You're saying that he chose Hellion Vivian because of that servant girl? This old monk can't answer you, retired emperor. Because this old monk isn't His Highness, I can't be sure what His Highness is thinking. Abbot Fengzhang's voice also slowly lowered. Perhaps he's just purely interested. Retired emperor clenched his hands. If Aju doesn't get Hellion Vivian, what will happen to him? Perhaps one day, that servant girl comes back. What will happen to Hellion Vivian? He will. I think you know, retired emperor. Regarding that servant girl's existence, it's impossible for His Highness not to be aware. Even if he doesn't know now, someone will think of a way to let him know. When that time comes, this old monk can't predict what kind of situation it will become. Head Abbot Fengzhang paused for a bit, then said again, "Didn't you say that it's very possible that His Highness has already recovered his chi? Since that's the case, I think, according to his habits, once he has a proper master, he wouldn't want a substitute. What's more, even now, you and I still haven't figured out what kind of attitude he's holding towards this substitute. Perhaps it's just like what you said at the beginning, that he's only using Wei Wei." When the retired emperor heard this, he pondered for a moment. Then, he looked back and said, Anyone is fine, but only that servant girl. I will never allow her to get close to Aju. She is a disaster to the imperial family. Back then, I should have tried my best to kill her. Now, everything will be fine. Ba. Head Abbot Fengzhang clasped his hands together. He didn't like to talk about killing. The retired emperor steadied his thoughts. When he opened his mouth again, he was as calm and wise as usual. Then, let him obtain Hellion Vivian for him before he knows that the servant girl has returned. Head Abbot Fengzhang furrowed his brows. Isn't this a bit too unfair to Hellion Vivian? Obviously, she was only a substitute. No, perhaps it was more appropriate to say that she was a rake. The retired emperor was still pushing her into the fire pit. The retired emperor didn't speak. Head Abbot Fengzhang knew that this was a decision that he had already made. The imperial family had always been ruthless, especially those who had reached a high position, even more so. The retired emperor met his line of sight, as if he was making a promise. When the time comes, if she really can't change Aju, I will let her withdraw without a single mistake. Head Abbot Fengzhang was astonished. The retired emperor believes that the Hellion family's girl can change his highness? Let's take a gamble. The retired emperor looked at the figure not far away. Aju isn't the kind of person who will lose his head for anyone. What those elders thought of may not necessarily be effective on him, but I have to leave him with something to think about. Head Abbot Fengzhang stared blankly. He suddenly felt that his body was somewhat cold. The retired emperor put it nicely as a thought, but in reality, if his highness always kept that maid's shadow in his heart, then as far as Hellion Vivian was concerned, no matter how well she lived, she was still only a substitute. Even if one day, his highness personally killed that maid, it would still be the same. It was just a pity that such a good stick was lost. According to reason, the person who was able to draw that wooden stick absolutely wouldn't walk this path in the future. Head Abbot Fengzhang lifted his eyes again and looked towards a direction not far away. He only hoped that in this game, that unique little girl wouldn't sink too deeply. Ba. The retired emperor looked at Head Abbot Fengzhang's appearance of putting his palms together. He extended his hand to let the accompanying eunuchs support him as he walked over. At that moment, he felt that he really was old. If he was still young, he definitely wouldn't take advantage of Hellion Vivian, this little girl. The more he looked at her, the more he felt that this girl's character was good, that she was sensible. However, there was no other way. His grandson needed this kind of person by his side. Even if it was a fire pit, he could only push her in. At this time, after coming out of the temple, Yuan Ming was finally able to speak. However, his voice still sounded unusually weak. He lazily nestled in the Xuanhuan space, looking like he didn't plan to come out for the time being. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What happened? I also can't say. Yuan Ming thought about what happened just now. I always felt that at that time, there was a very familiar aura. However, when you bumped into that third prince from behind, that aura disappeared. However, the shaking was too big. You have to give this senior a bit of time to recover his strength. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. What aura? I'm not sure yet. Wait until I'm sure, then I'll tell you. I'm going to sleep first. Yuan Ming waved his hand, directly blocking the mental communication. However, he hid something in his heart. He didn't know if it was his misperception. In that instant, he actually felt that man's aura. Ah, how is that possible? That man's primordial spirit had already been destroyed. How could he still be in this world? It must be that he thought too much. Yuan Ming yawned and rubbed the small book cover that Hellion Vivian gave him with a big heart. He began to devour the aura and cultivate. When Hellion Vivian saw him like this, she didn't continue to ask more questions. She wouldn't ask a devil to tell her the truth about everything. Lying was a devil's nature. Since Yuan Ming didn't want to say it, she didn't need to get to the bottom of it. It's just that it was very rare to see him like this. This made Wei Wei somewhat unable to figure out what happened just now. Obviously, the inside of the temple appeared to be harmonious. If one had to say something, it would be that third prince appeared to be somewhat unhappy. Hellion Vivian recalled the scene in the temple just now and slightly frowned. Miss Vivian, just as she was thinking, she suddenly heard someone calling her. When she turned around, she saw Eunuch's son standing behind her. There was hesitation on his face. There is one thing that this slave wants to trouble Miss Vivian to help. Hellion Vivian withdrew her hand from opening the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly. What's the matter? His Royal Highness' hand was injured when the retired emperor offered incense. Until now, he hasn't applied medicine. Eunuch's son said anxiously. When he met Hellion Vivian's eyes, he sighed. His Royal Highness probably forgot. But when he saw the carriage, he gave an order that no one was allowed to approach it. This old slave is worried about his Royal Highness' hands. On such a hot day, will pus form? Chapter 206. It's not to the extent of pus. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and helped him out of the predicament. However, if there are scars on His Highness' hands, it will affect their beauty. Should I go with Eunuch's son to take a look? Eunuch's son seemed to have seen his savior. His eyes lit up and he reached out his hand. Eldest miss, follow this old servant to this side. As he spoke, he turned his head and instructed those little eunuchs. You guys go ahead first. If anyone dares to speak of today's matter, be careful of your neck. Hellion Vivian knew that this was to pave the way for her. Fortunately, the Hellion Jower and the others had already left. Otherwise, if they saw Hellion Vivian enter the royal family's carriage, many things would happen. Eunuch's son's words were to help Hellion Vivian avoid these troubles, thereby achieving the goal of protecting Hellion Vivian. After all, if a woman was jealous and did something malicious, it would be hard to guard against. Eunuch's son led Hellion Vivian all the way over. He originally wanted to let him report, but at this time, the retired emperor's carriage was also lifted. He suddenly didn't know what to do. Hellion Vivian naturally saw that he was busy, but she didn't care. I'll go over by myself. Eunuch's son, you can go to your own thing. Then I'll have to trouble Miss Vivian. Eunuch's son turned his head and instructed the little eunuch who was leading the way, then hurriedly walked over to the retired emperor's carriage. The little eunuch probably hadn't been with Eunuch's son for a long time. He didn't even look at Wei Wei's eyes and lowered his head. Miss Wei Wei, His Highness' carriage is over there. Hellion Vivian looked up and saw a carved black wooden carriage not far away. That carriage was very large and didn't have any extra decorations. The carriage roof was carved with floating clouds and was made of the best sandalwood. It was low-key and revealed a sense of luxury that was difficult to hide. Okay, I got it. Hellion Vivian walked over but was stopped a meter away. That was also a small eunuch who served Bailey Jia Ju the entire way. Seeing that Wei Wei had arrived, the way he spoke didn't carry any trace of politeness. This young lady, look clearly. Your carriage is over there, not here with His Highness. Hellion Vivian knew that he was doing what he should do. After all, if everyone could get close to the third prince's carriage, then there would be trouble. Just as Hellion Vivian was about to explain the purpose of her visit, a voice suddenly rang out. However, the young eunuch muttered again. Does he really think that it's so easy to curry favor with His Highness? Not only did he use underhanded means in the Buddhist hall, but now he's trying to curry favor with His Highness. Doesn't he know that His Highness hates this the most? Curry favor? After Wei Wei heard these two words, she sneered and extended her hand to pull him over by the collar. Her tone of voice was neither light nor indifferent. I was invited by your eunuch's son to apply medicine for His Highness. However, it seems that there's no need for that now. After her words fell, Hellion Vivian turned around and planned to leave. The young eunuch snorted disapprovingly. She was invited by eunuch's son? Who was she trying to fool? Did she think that she was a great beauty? If it was someone like Miss Zhao Er, who had a good family background and good looks, saying these kinds of words would make sense. Look at her face. It was so dark that people didn't dare to compliment her. What's more, in the Buddhist hall, His Highness was already disgusted with this woman. He definitely didn't want her to come close. The young eunuch raised his chin and was immensely pleased with himself. Then, he heard a voice from the carriage without any warmth. It was so cold and indifferent that it made people's scalps go numb. If she leaves, then use your head in exchange. It seemed like he still hadn't woken up from his sleep. His eyes were half closed. and his thick eyebrows and dark eyelashes were lowered, reflecting a dark shadow. His ink-like long curly hair draped over his back. Inside, he wore a pure white robe. However, the collar of the robe had been pulled open by him. Large roses were embroidered on the luxurious brocade with silver thread. It was extraordinarily exquisite. Even the cuffs of his sleeves were embroidered with half a lotus. His entire person was elegant to the extreme from inside out. This kind of Beligaju lacked the indifferent, holy, and noble appearance that he had in front of others. Instead, he was more languid and deadly sexy. He was half lying on the fur-covered chaise lounge in the carriage. One of his long legs was half bent. Even when she came in, he didn't lift his eyelids. Chapter 207. Helene Vivian didn't need him to greet her. She rolled up her sleeves and leaned close to look at him. Which hand was it hurt? Beligaju then opened his pair of extremely beautiful eyes and faintly glanced at her. After that, he opened up his left hand. Sure enough, there was a wound in the center of his palm, and there were even beads of blood on it. If Eunuch Sun knew that one day, Beligaju could be so cooperative, his eyeballs would definitely fall out of their sockets. The shadows standing outside the carriage also had the same feeling. At the same time, they breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, they also felt that it was inconceivable. In their memories, when had His Highness ever been this obedient? It seemed like it had never happened before. He wouldn't even let a woman touch his fingers. Even that person in the past was the same. But ever since this Hellion family's young miss appeared, Master's habits became more and more unfathomable. Thinking of this, the shadows couldn't help but look in the direction of the carriage. Their eyes were filled with admiration for Helene Vivian. Helene Vivian didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the royal family normally. Just now, when she was standing in the Buddhist hall, she unexpectedly didn't see the wound on the man's hand at all. It was clear that the royal family wanted to hide something. If he didn't want to, then no one would know. Helene Vivian looked at that wound. It didn't look like it was caused by a sharp weapon. Rather, it looked like the royal family had crushed something. In the end, who made him so angry? Helene Vivian swept a glance at the arrangement inside the carriage. She also didn't find any ointment. Instead, there was a handkerchief. However, this kind of wound generally needed to be disinfected. What she was afraid of was that there were some shards stuck inside. Thinking of this, Helene Vivian stood up. She didn't expect that this kind of action would touch the man's reverse scale. It made him ignore the wound on his hand and directly grab her wrist. His eyes, as deep as the cold pool of midnight, watched Helene Vivian attentively. His tone was indifferent. "Where are you going?" The silhouette of the man with a silver mask had an illusory beauty that was otherworldly. Only his pale, thin lips gave people a sense of cold asceticism. His pure white clothes had some golden embroidered clouds at this moment, making him look even more noble. Being looked up at by him, Helene Vivian always felt that in his eyes, she was his whole world. It was probably because he was used to being looked down upon by the royal family. Helene Vivian told herself that, but she still felt that this royal was more likable. At the very least, she didn't have a venomous tongue. Unexpectedly, Beligaju's next sentence was, "Do you want to go out now and smash someone to death? It's really rare to bump into someone while walking." Helene Vivian. Other than attacking her intelligence, would the royal family talk to her about anything else? Suddenly, without any warning, Bailey Jiaju forcefully pulled and pressed her into his embrace. His white robe danced in an arc along with his movement. He pinched her chin and then slowly raised it. His pair of eyes were slightly cold. "In the future, stay further away from Heizei. Do you understand?" "What's wrong with Heizei?" Helene Vivian frowned. She subconsciously thought that he was thinking about the involvement of the four great families. She lowered her eyes and said, "Don't worry, I know what to do. Even if we have a good relationship, there are some things that shouldn't be said, so I won't say it." "So, shouldn't your highness let go of your hand?" Helene Vivian used her strength and skillfully pressed down on his wrist. She lightly flung it away and then tidied up her clothes. "Your highness, in the future, just say what you want to say. Don't use your hands." Bailey Jiaju indifferently hummed in agreement. Hellion Vivian. Boss, that's Tianshan's snow lotus. It wasn't an ordinary flower or plant. Is there a difference? Beligaju looked at her. His tone was steady, without a trace of fluctuation. Hellion Vivian was speechless. She always felt that she was very wasteful. In the modern era, she spent a lot of money to buy a basement just to put her guns and toys. Now, compared to a certain highness, she was simply a little expert at saving money. Throwing Tianshan's snow lotus? Haha, he might as well throw out a chest of silvers. The more Hellion Wei Wei came into contact with his highness, the more she discovered that her Prince Charming's otherworldly nature was mainly manifested in two aspects. One was his unfathomable thoughts and methods that could change the weather with a flip of his hand. The other was that he really was very rich. You're so far away from this, highness. How are you going to apply the ointment? Chapter 208. Beligaju's slender and white fingers rested on the short, sandalwood table. His emotionless eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's body, and his eyebrows raised. Hellion Vivian felt that she was close enough. This carriage was the biggest, but there wasn't much space. If she moved a little closer, the two of them would inevitably have physical contact. It's easy to get hurt if you get closer. Hellion Vivian turned her face to the side and dipped the needle in the ointment ground from the Tianshan snow lotus. She didn't raise her head and said, "It's not good to offend His Highness when the time comes." He seemed to look at her, and his tone was indifferent. "There's nothing bad about it." And? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked into his eyes. She was still wondering if this man's misophobia had been cured. She heard him slowly open his mouth. "Sooner or later, I'll offend you." When he said the word offend, she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but he reached over Hellion Vivian and put down the curtain behind her. His voice was neither light nor heavy as it brushed past Hellion Vivian's ear. When his breath hit her ear, it always made people feel a little numb. Hellion Vivian turned her face to the side and looked at the man's cold eyes. She shifted her position. This man was simply the evildoer of evildoers. If he wanted to bewitch someone in the future, it would be very easy. Hellion Vivian raised her head and smiled. She moved closer and naturally held Beligaju's wrist with one hand. She held the silver needle in the other hand and slowly opened the place where it should be broken into pieces. Her whole person gave people a very comfortable feeling. However, she still felt that the two of them were too close to each other. She didn't know if the royal had any complaints about her touching his hand. The whole time, he lowered his eyes to look at her. The sense of presence was too strong, making Hellion Vivian wrinkle her eyebrows several times. However, this didn't affect Hellion Vivian's treatment of the wound. Her hand didn't even tremble. First, she picked the ointment in his palm. Crush the dregs and apply the ointment directly, then tie it up with a white handkerchief. Done. All right. Hellion Vivian stood up. She wanted to stop the carriage so that she could get off. However, Bailey Jiaju instructed the people outside. Hurry up, go to the front. Hellion Vivian. On the wooden table, the smoke in the mouth of the Chilan incense burner became thinner and thinner. Beligaju opened the lid of the burner and swept a glance at her. "If you go down now, everyone will know that you have boarded my carriage." No, she didn't mean that at all. If others found out, there would be endless trouble. The thing she was most lazy to deal with was trouble. Hellion Vivian yawned and was a little sleepy. "Then when can I go down?" Beligaju's beautiful eyes narrowed. She didn't like to stay in the same carriage as him. As if inadvertently, Beligaju threw away the lid in his hand and leaned back with a faint smile. "You can also go." If she moved, he would break her pair of claws, so that he wouldn't be annoyed by it. Hellion Vivian glanced at him and felt that this person was a little unhappy. She frowned. "Then tell them to stop." Beligaju's fingers, which were hidden under his long sleeves, clenched. He smiled wickedly and said coldly, "Drive faster." Hellion Vivian. Was the royal deliberately making things difficult for her today? Did they have to be so unreasonable? "Perhaps I can stay here for a while before going down?" Chatting until now, Wei Wei had a bit of awareness. Third Prince didn't want other people to know about the relationship between the two of them right now. Beligaju grunted and slightly tilted his head to the left, as if he didn't want Hellion Vivian to see his current mood. Hellion Vivian didn't care where she slept. Fire Cheelin, who came to watch, silently turned its head. This liar, who didn't even blink when he lied, was really its master? However, it wasn't wrong to think about it. His Highness' principle of treating his prey was to use all means possible. But when it came to patience, this seemed to be the first time. But it was obvious that Hellion Vivian's attention to other men made His Highness lose this patience. Chapter 209. Why aren't you continuing? Beligaju stopped what he was doing, as if he was smiling, but there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in his eyes. Even though Hellion Vivian felt that she didn't handle this matter properly, but what she had to say, she still had to say, Your Highness, we made a contract. It says that we should help each other, not restrain each other. Beligaju didn't look at her, as if he didn't care about what she said, but also as if he was a little absent-minded. He didn't even notice that the hot tea in his hand had spilled out. He only said with a cold voice, You mean to say that even if you want to see Hei Zhe, I can't do anything about it? No. Hellion Vivian saw that his hot tea was about to stain the wound on his palm. She reached out and held his left hand, moving it to the side, and said again, I just feel that we can't affect each other's freedom. If Your Highness wants to see a woman today, and I say that I don't want Your Highness to go, Your Highness will definitely feel uncomfortable. After all, you won't. Without waiting for Hellion Vivian to finish speaking, Beligaju faintly interrupted her and said with a clear and cold tone, I know who I'm going to marry. In other words, you don't know who you're going to marry. Being said like this by a man, Hellion Vivian actually felt a bit guilty. Logically speaking, it was indeed a taboo for a normal couple. Have you ever thought about what the consequences would be if you lost your reputation before the martial chi test? Beligaju's voice didn't seem to have changed, but the clouds outside suddenly thickened by a layer. The originally light breeze suddenly became more than twice as strong, sweeping past her ears like 10 armies and 10,000 horses trampling on withered leaves. It was a bit scary. The consequences would be that you can't marry into the imperial family for the rest of your life. Hellion Vivian was just about to open her mouth when she heard him continue. This Highness will not allow anyone to break the contract between you and this Highness. If you insist on seeing him, then this Highness can only take action and help the Hei family take care of their second young master. Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. She had never thought that things would develop like this. Only now did she clearly understand what people meant by the royal family's methods. For a long time, he had been indifferent, even elegant to the point of indifference. So much so that she forgot how ruthless he was when he hunted her down. As for the royal family, as long as you didn't touch his reverse scale, everything would be fine. If you ruined his plan, he wouldn't mind showing you what he was capable of. It was only because in this game, she was just a chess piece, so it was natural for him to care about her reputation. Hellion Vivian smiled and raised her head to reply, I know. Then she sat back down in her original seat, polite but distant. A cooperation should look like a cooperation. Although the royal family's words were a bit heartless, it was the truth. It was just that Hellion Weiwei had an alarm in her heart. She would never be anyone's chess piece. This game was started by her, so she should be the one to end it. From now on, she had to carefully plan how to escape unscathed, because she realized that the partner she had chosen was really more dangerous than she had imagined. If she wasn't careful, there might be a bottomless abyss in front of her. Hellion Vivian liked to work with this kind of person. That would make everything easier. However, at the same time, Hellion Vivian also knew that she had to be careful in the future. In this game, not only did they have to work together to deal with each other, they also had to maintain their distance. Having encountered such a well-matched opponent, Hellion Weiwei felt that her whole body was filled with vigor. She even thought that in the future, when everything was settled, she would wander to the ends of the world and look for Bailey Jiaju to fight. As for now, it was better to be clear about her position. As for Hei's, she could only make an appointment at the academy. Beligaju found that he didn't like her obedience at all. That kind of distance that came from her bones was like a wall, forcibly pushing him a meter away. For a Hei's, she was like this. Heh, good, very good. Beligaju narrowed his eyes, his expression proud and lonely. An ice-cold wind blew across his face. She was just a prey that he liked more. He slowly clenched his hand. Although he was mocking her in his heart, he couldn't help but tighten his grip on the scroll. The atmosphere in the carriage seemed to have frozen. When Eunuch's son opened the curtain, he saw this scene. He was hesitating whether or not to shrink back. Beligaju raised his eyes to look at him, then lazily leaned back. He casually untied his robe with one hand and casually put the other hand on the side. What is it? Something was wrong. Eunuch's son understood His Highness. The worse his mood was, the more he would be like this. Strange. According to what they said, His Highness was in a good mood the whole way. He even asked for some tea and snacks, saying that it was for someone to eat. How did it become like this now? Eunuch's son held the tray in his hands. He thought for a moment and said, "Your Highness, do you want to eat this osmanthus cake with tea? Or this old servant will go get some candied fruits for you." "No need." Beligaju's deep voice floated over with the sound of rain. "No one is eating it anymore." Hearing this, Eunuch's son felt more and more that something was wrong. He looked at Hellion Vivian and gave her a meaningful look. Hellion Vivian reached out and brought the wooden tray over. She put it in Beligaju's hand. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Eat more. Your Highness' hand will heal faster." The wind outside seemed to be a bit weaker. Bailey Jiaju glanced at her and did not refuse. He only used his eyes to glance at his left hand and then at her face. After serving Beligaju for so many years, Eunuch's son understood His Highness the most. Seeing this scene, he quickly said, "Eldest miss, it is inconvenient for His Highness to eat with his hand. This old servant's hand is also dirty. I ask the eldest miss to help this old servant persuade His Highness to eat a few more pieces." Without waiting for Hellion Vivian to decline, Eunuch's son retreated from the carriage. Hellion Vivian was still a bit hesitant. On the other side, Bailey Jiaju had already clumsily picked up a piece of pastry with his hand wrapped in a white handkerchief. Probably because the pastry touched his wound, his long eyebrows also wrinkled. The crumbs of the pastry scattered on his gown and rolled to the side of her feet. He appeared to be somewhat embarrassed. Hellion Vivian didn't think much of it. She directly took the other pieces of pastry from the tray and put them in front of his mouth. Just when Hellion Vivian thought that he would dislike her hand, the royal prince opened his mouth. When his thin lips slid across the pastry, he lightly touched her finger. It was a bit cold that was hard to ignore. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but take a step back. Looking at Beligaju's slightly puzzled eyebrows, she felt that she was making a fuss over nothing. Chapter 210. His Highness probably didn't bite her finger on purpose. Although this man's mind was very deep, he didn't seem to think too much about the matters between men and women. According to Hellion Vivian's experience, she felt that this kind of abstinent Prince Charming usually liked soft little white rabbits because it was more fun to bully them. Hellion Vivian wasn't wrong. There were indeed many people who liked that kind of thing, but she had never thought about it. There was a kind of man called Beligaju. He didn't like to bully little white rabbits, but lazy and difficult to tame people like her. The more difficult it was to manipulate, the more Beligaju wanted to break her claws. The wind outside the carriage finally slowed down, and it was very comfortable to blow on the face. "Okay, you can eat the rest." It was originally prepared for someone, so Beligaju naturally wouldn't eat too much. What's more, he had never liked to eat these things. Since he had already taken advantage of it, he would stop. The smarter the prey, the more he had to stew the frog in warm water, gradually. As for the other obstacles, Beligaju narrowed his eyes and slid the tip of his tongue over his fingertips. If necessary, he would personally take action. Hellion Vivian at the side didn't know that Beligaju had this idea, or it could be said that she was a little hungry since just now. She looked at the half-piece of osmanthus cake in her hand, opened her mouth and swallowed it. Her eating posture was elegant, but her small face was still puffed up. The osmanthus cake tasted very good. It wasn't too sweet, and it was made with the best honey. When it melted in the mouth, it was so delicious that Hellion Vivian was very satisfied. Beligaju looked at her and was stunned. This Highness ate that before? Hellion Vivian puffed up her cheeks and looked up, chewing the osmanthus cake in her mouth. Didn't you say that I should eat the rest? Beligaju looked at her indifferently and seemed to be quite helpless. He supported his forehead with his fingers. I was talking about the food on the plate. Forget it. You continue to eat. For some reason, Hellion Vivian felt that the words forget it were an insult to her intelligence. Looking at the small face in front of him, Beligaju's eyes flashed with a smile. He put his finger to his mouth and coughed a few times. Hellion Vivian naturally saw that he was making fun of her and suddenly felt a little depressed. Thinking about it, she was usually very smart, but why did she always feel that her brain was not enough in front of this man? Go ahead and laugh if you want to. Hellion Weiwei leaned back and curled her lips. That kind of vexed little action was very small, but it was clearly caught by the black-bellied His Highness. He thought, in fact, this prey has a weakness. As long as he can hold on, there will be a day when he can directly eat her. He was looking forward to her performance after the wedding. I should be able to use the golden silk prison bed in the palace. She was very suitable to lie on top of it and be slowly invaded by him. That scene would definitely be very beautiful. His prey must be matched with the best things so that he can offend her to his heart's content. Your Highness, the carriage is about to enter the city. Eunuch Sun paid attention to the surroundings. Even if he didn't want to, he had to remind his master through the curtain. In a while, the carriage of the academy students will take a fork in the road and will separate from the carriage entering the city. Do you think it's time for this servant to send eldest young miss back, in case there are too many people talking about it? This time, Hellion Weiwei did not wait for Bailey Jiaju to open his mouth. She patted the osmanthus cake off her body and directly lifted the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly and said, Eunuch Sun, please lead the way. I have to go back. Eunuch Sun looked at Beligaju behind her and saw that his master did not smile coldly. Only then did he nod his head and answer frankly, yes. Beligaju indifferently drank a mouthful of tea. After Hellion Vivian left, he glanced at An Ing. An Ing naturally understood his master's meaning. He respectfully lowered his eyes and then swept in the direction of Hellion Vivian. To walk back to his own carriage from the third prince's carriage, there was originally a distance between them. But Eunuch Sun was a shrewd person. Along the way, he made arrangements and asked someone to drive Hellion Vivian's carriage in front and behind. This way, it was convenient to change. Eunuch Sun lifted the curtain for Hellion Vivian with a smile on his face. This time, it's all thanks to the eldest miss. As servants, we are worried about His Highness, but we can't understand his thoughts. We can only rely on the eldest miss's help. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and chuckled. I also can't understand your master's thoughts, but it's right to follow the fur of a tiger. Eunuch Sun suddenly choked. It's not good to compare His Highness to a tiger, right? Hellion Vivian did not look at his reaction and entered the carriage. What's wrong? Beligaju looked at An Ing who came back in less than a quarter of an hour and raised his beautiful eyebrows. Shadow thought about it for a while, but still decided to recite Hellion Weiwei's words to him. Bailey Jiaju sneered. She's actually smart. So it turned out that she was just coaxing him. He thought that she was being sincere. Such a little thing. She was not afraid of a tiger like him swallowing her. He thought that even she helped him bandage his wound under Eunuch Sun's instructions. His good mood just now had changed, and it made his eyes turn even colder. Follow the fur of a tiger? Who was the real prey between the two of them? It seemed that someone still did not know what to do with her claws. Continue to look at her. Beligaju withdrew his gaze. Shadow, however, was somewhat lost in his own thoughts. He'd also thought that if he told that information to His Highness definitely wouldn't spend so much energy on Weiwei like he did now. To him, there should only be that one person who was special. But An Ing could not help but rejoice that there was a person like Hellion Vivian, so His Highness did not have time to listen to other news until now. It's just that Shadow looked at the carriage not too far away and let out a long sigh. If the main character really did come, then Weiwei, to His Highness, would only be left as a tool to be used. However, no one cared about those minor details anymore, because returning from the Hidden Spirit Temple meant that the martial chi competition that everyone was looking forward to was about to begin. regardless of whether it was the students of the White Academy or the people of the four great clans. All of them put their attention on this matter, cultivating all day long. Gradually, many experts wearing capes and carrying armaments on the streets gradually appeared in the capital city. All of them came from other places, which was enough to show how big the impact of this test was. What Hellion Weiwei wanted to do was to take advantage of this influence and make a lot of money. The martial chi test was about to begin. Getting a good armament was an urgent matter for every martial artist. And as the boss of Profound Heaven, she naturally would not let go of such a good business opportunity. Besides, it was time to close the net and catch the fish. Chapter 211. Originally, it was very difficult for Hellion Vivian to leave the White Academy in the past. Firstly, she did not have the authority. Secondly, after she was driven out by her family, those teachers had always looked down on her. In addition, her master, Grandmaster Zizun, was not around recently. If she wanted to ask for leave, she even had to write the reason why she wanted to do something. Now it was different. The leave in her hands was won by the Academy's examination. No one would ask where she went and what she did down the mountain. Therefore, after returning to the White Academy again, Hellion Vivian did not go to class unlike ordinary people, which made everyone think that she was shocked. After all, a person who only knew how to do martial arts but did not understand what martial chi was, appearing in class at this time was indeed very awkward. Some people even suspected that Hellion Weiwei simply did not understand the principles that the teacher was talking about. That was why she took the initiative to give up on the lessons during this period of time, so that everyone would not be able to take care of her when they were practicing martial chi. After hearing this news, the Hellion Jiaoer coldly snorted. She is quite self-aware this time. As she spoke, she instructed the servant girl below. In the future, there is no need to inquire about this little bitch anymore. Mother is right. I was too short-sighted in the past. Being serious with an ugly woman like her is simply lowering my own taste. Let her fiddle with her pile of scrap iron in her dreams. No matter how well she does it, she won't be able to sell a single piece, let alone participate in the martial chi competition. Go and see when Mother will be back, and help me ask about the current situation of Profound Heaven. Yes. The servant girl saw that her miss was in a good mood, and her attitude also followed suit. Miss wants to get an armament from Profound Heaven before the martial chi competition? The Hellion Jiaoer nodded. That small face with arrogance. Father should have already set up a connection for me. Now I am just waiting for Mother to come back. The servant girl took the opportunity to flatter. You are really worthy of being Miss. This servant heard that the armament of Profound Heaven is very difficult to get. Few of the young ladies in the capital can get it. Father's connections are naturally not weak. Hellion Jiaoer blew on her freshly dyed red hair and coolly glanced at her. What's more, those people who only rely on their families to get ahead, how can they compare to me? The servant girl smiled. Mrs. Wright? Presumably, the boss of Profound Heavens heard of your reputation in the capital and knew that he had offended you in Armament City. He wanted to give Miss an armament to atone for his crime. You can say that in front of me, but don't say that in front of outsiders. Although Hellion Jiaoer was scolding her, her face was full of pride. The maidservant lowered her eyes. Young miss, don't worry. I know that those people outside are jealous of you. I won't say such words outside. If you were to meet someone like the eldest miss who had evil intentions, what kind of trouble would it cause? It's good that you understand. The Hellion Jiaoer leaned back and reclined on the sandalwood chair. She looked like she had already obtained the Profound Heavens armament. The servant girl smiled again and fawningly handed her a cup of tea. Her every move was subservient. She breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the young miss had finally returned to normal. During this time, because of the eldest miss, the young miss's mood had never been good. In the end, the ones who suffered were them, the servants. However, the eldest miss was also too much. Why did she like to jump around in front of the young miss so much? Now that something big happened, she was beaten back to her original state. She probably also felt that her martial chi was not good enough, so she found a place to hide. As the servant girl thought, she looked at the Hellion Jiaoer's face. Seeing that she seemed to be asleep, She gently put down the fan in her hand and also took a nap. However, they didn't know that at this moment, Hellion Vivian was sitting on the second floor of Profound Heaven's #1 shop. She was dressed in men's clothing and holding a paper umbrella. She stood with her back to the light, making the servant who came to greet her very puzzled. "This guest, our steward, is out today. We don't know when he will be back. Would you like to come back another day?" The servant who was doing chores was very polite, and his tone was gentle. This was the recruitment policy of Profound Heavens. No matter how good the other party was, Hellion Vivian's first rule was to choose a servant who could make the customer feel good. Therefore, the reason why Profound Heaven's business was so good was not without reason. Hellion Vivian turned around and looked at him, her thin lips slightly curved. "I'll wait for a while." The servant was stunned. Obviously, he was stunned by the person in front of him. He had never seen anyone who looked so gorgeous. At this time, Hellion Wei Wei had regained her appearance. She was wearing a long robe with a golden border and clouds inlaid with 1-inch-wide roses. Her beautiful hair was lazily draped over her ears. Her jet-black hair was alluring. She was not dressed very neatly, but her figure was graceful and graceful. Her posture was elegant, her complexion was magnificent, and her aura was like the moon. Under the golden sunset, her straight and slender legs were more beautiful than a model's, especially when her red sleeves floated in the air and she held a folded umbrella in her hand. The servant thought that he had seen a fairy from the sky. He was a little confused and stood there in a daze. He began to wonder which family this young lady was from. How could she be born with such a bewitching appearance? Yes, although Hellion Vivian was wearing men's clothing, but the shrewd servant still saw her gender, so he was even more confused. He knew a lot of people in the capital, but he had never seen anyone who was more outstanding than this person in front of him. Strangely, he had never seen this person before. No one in the capital had ever mentioned such a person. While the servant was puzzled, he saw the carriages of the 4 stewards appear in front of the shop. The servant was shocked. Usually, only 1 or 2 stewards came to the shop. Why were all 4 stewards here today? Could it be that the second boss was coming? That's not right. The second boss sent a message the day before yesterday, saying that his father had been very strict recently and was forcing him to get married. He disliked that he was always hanging around outside, so he was grounded in the backyard. He said that he would only be released in 2 days. Then what could have happened? For all 4 of the stewards to come. The servant thought for a moment. He could no longer care about the guests behind him. He quickly tidied his collar and hurriedly ran downstairs. Unexpectedly, before he could speak, Steward Zhang asked him, "Is someone looking for this old man today?" "Yes." The servant quickly responded and followed Steward Zhang to look around. "Where is that person?" Strangely, Steward Zhang, who had always been calm, sounded a little anxious. The servant pointed upstairs. "That guest is still waiting in the private room on the 2nd floor. "On the 2nd floor?" Steward Zhang clenched his teeth. "Why did you arrange for him to be on the 2nd floor?" Chapter 212. The servant thought to himself, "It wasn't me who arranged this. It was that person who entered the building as if it was her own home. She entered the private room as if she was familiar with the place. She knew the layout better than him. The 2nd floor it is." Manager Zhang lifted his robe and hurriedly walked upstairs. As he walked, he said, "Go and bring me the best armament parts and the accounts of the store for the past 2 days." The servant exclaimed, "Look at it now? Look at it now." As Manager Zhang spoke, he had already pushed open the door. After seeing that familiar figure, he smiled with relief. "Big boss, you're finally here." "Big boss?" The servant looked up in shock. His eyes flashed with unconcealable astonishment. This person turned out to be the elusive big boss of Profound Heaven. The servant obviously didn't dare to believe it. He glanced at Hellion Vivian again. Wait a minute. He needed time to cool down. Their big boss wasn't a man, wasn't a mighty and majestic man. Instead, it was a young girl who looked less than 20 years old. What happened to the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear? What happened to the white-haired old man? What happened to the reclusive master? What happened to the man who had never shown his face because of his ugly appearance? Their big boss clearly only relied on her face to win against many people. Uncle Zhang. Hellion Vivian smiled. She reached out and shook hands with Manager Zhang. Then, she glanced at the servant. The servant was dazed. He thought that this voice was also very pleasant to hear. Manager Zhang slapped the back of the servant's head. Why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and prepare the things I just asked you to bring. After he finished speaking, he smiled at Hellion Vivian. This is this old servant's new disciple. He just entered the store and is not familiar with it. Hellion Vivian smiled. Very good. We can hang him in the store as a mascot. The servant suddenly felt like he was in a dream. Was he just praised by his idol? No. After getting the accounts, he must go downstairs and run a few laps. Steward Zhang looked at his own subordinate going downstairs foolishly, helplessly shook his head and said to Hellion Wei Wei, as soon as this old servant received the boss's letter, this old servant rushed back from outside. Only, I don't know what the boss meant by making a profit. Old Zhang, that's enough. Our brothers haven't all arrived yet, and you want to trick the boss into giving you lessons. The burly manager Wei walked up. Wei Wei saw that all of her capable subordinates had arrived. Only then did she put away the umbrella in her hand, her eyes shining. You should all know that the armaments test is about to begin. Compared to other armaments, our business is indeed not bad. However, compared to what I expected, it's still a bit worse. That's why, starting today, we need to change our business philosophy. From now on, the only thing we need to do is to build momentum. Build momentum? Steward Wei was a little confused. Profound Heavens is currently flourishing. Those people are squeezing their heads and trying to order an armament from our guild. Who in the entire capital city doesn't know about Profound Heavens? They are no different from country bumpkins. Hellion Vivian put down the umbrella in her hand. Although the action was light, because of the excellent armament, it changed the surrounding airflow. This is not enough. This is not enough? Manager Wei stared and turned to look at Manager Zhang. Even the calm and steady Manager Zhang couldn't understand Hellion Vivian's meaning. He could only wait for Hellion Vivian's next words. Hellion Vivian's slender fingers tapped on the table. When she looked up, the sun was setting. Outside the large French windows, it was as if the entire evening had become her foil. Her eyes flashed with a burning light. The harder it is to obtain something, the more precious it is. Let's spread our brand. From today onwards, stop all armaments production. Tell them that in the next few days, Profound Heavens will only sell 5 armaments. We will implement a membership gold card system. We will sell armaments in the form of an auction. Every day, the auction house will only invite 100 gold card members to participate in the auction. If you want to see it, you can come and visit. But there's one thing, you have to reserve the location in advance. This approach is a bit too bold. Manager Wei was tongue-tied. He had never thought that doing business could be done this way. After all, when they opened the shop, Big Boss had told them that everything should be based on the customer's feelings. Now, it seemed like it was the other way around. Was it possible for those high-ranking officials and nobles to curry favor with them? What's more, those people were not only rich merchants, but also first-ranking officials. Would they accept this approach? However, Manager Wei had to admit that once this approach was successful, they would completely break through the current stage and truly enjoy the same treatment as the century-old aristocratic family shop. This made him feel excited no matter how he thought about it. Hellion Vivian glanced at him and smiled evilly. Where we come from, there's a term called private customization. There's also a term called limited release. Manager Wei, you have to remember that the so-called private customization and limited release only mean one thing. Some people need these things to show their worth. It's not for anything else, but to let everyone know that they have something that no one else in this world can have. So there's no problem at all. Taking advantage of this opportunity will make a good profit. At that moment, Manager Wei felt that the young lady in front of him didn't seem like a businesswoman. Her mouth carried an evil aura that ordinary women didn't have. It was like a raging fire that easily made people think of a battlefield. She was like a queen standing behind the scenes, arranging and scheming, commanding the troops. This time, the capital's business circle would probably be reshuffled again. When Profound Heaven's limited edition armaments were launched, it attracted the attention of all the big circles in the capital. Just like what Hellion Vivian said, one of a kind, this kind of symbol of status was very eye-catching. Adding on the fact that the armaments test was approaching, everyone was very curious about the auction that would be held the day after tomorrow. Even those who didn't need armaments also wanted to see the elegance of the limited edition armaments. It could be said that they had no regrets in life. Even the retired emperor, who had always been experienced and knowledgeable, was alarmed. He sent people to Profound Heaven to reserve a seat for the auction, preparing to personally see the legendary armaments. Big boss, is this okay? Manager Zhang took out a pure silver card and gave it to Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian took it and looked at it. Her beautiful fingers twirled around and the corners of her mouth slightly curved. Not bad. When you give it to everyone, make sure that it's real money. Tell them that here, identity, and whatnot are of no use. Yes. Manager Zhang slightly lowered his head. To be honest, he completely didn't think that this kind of card would be bought by people. But the situation was beyond his imagination. Now, the whole capital was talking about the silver card. In their eyes, this kind of silver card had already become a symbol of noble status. Chapter 213. It was night and the moonlight was getting darker. Outside the window, one could see the mountains and trees. The steward of the general's residence was holding a lantern outside the door in the middle of the night. He looked left and right as if he was waiting for someone, looking very mysterious. When he saw the carriage coming, he hurriedly held the lantern and went up to it. Madam, it turned out that the person who rushed back in the middle of the night was none other than Su Yanmo, who was ordered by the retired emperor to stay in the Hidden Spirit Temple to abstain from meat and prey. This trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple not only caused her to lose a maidservant for no reason, but she also lost 70 to 80% of her face. If it weren't for her husband's family having a say in the imperial court, she really would have stayed in the Hidden Spirit Temple for 10 days to half a month. But even if it was only 3 days, it was enough to make Su Yanmo vomit a ball of anger in her heart. She glanced at the steward coldly. What about the thing I asked you to do? Don't worry, madam. I have already made arrangements. Recently, Profound Heavens is doing some kind of VIP card distribution. I have already made an appointment with the steward there. Tomorrow, madam will be able to bring Miss there. You will definitely be able to buy a good armament. The steward held the lantern for Su Yanmo while waiting at her beck and call. Su Yanmo nodded in satisfaction and said, What has that little bastard been doing recently? Eldest Miss doesn't have the slightest bit of martial chi in her body. Recently, White Academy's courses are all related to martial chi. She probably couldn't stay any longer and asked for leave. The steward reported word for word the news he received from the courtyard. Su Yanmo smiled, her face showing her natural arrogance. All right, you can leave. We will go to Profound Heavens first thing in the morning tomorrow. After so many years of flattery, she knew that little bastard better than anyone else. She felt inferior, yet she wanted to stand out. Now, she finally knew what she was worth. After this martial chi test, that little bastard would understand that she and her beloved daughter were not on the same level at all. She was originally a good-for-nothing, and when her name was removed from the family, she left so vigorously. At that time, she would still have to come back like a beggar without a single redeeming feature and beg for a living. Su Yanmo thought of the future scene and the smile on the corner of her mouth became wider. One should not be so naive. She was so muddle-headed that she had even forgotten who she was, yet she still dared to provoke her. Sooner or later, that little bastard would kneel on the ground and lick her feet. She was not in a hurry. This was just the beginning. At night, the crescent moon hung in the sky. In the extremely luxurious palace, there were layers of white gauze curtains. A huge and incomparably luxurious golden cage was placed in the middle of the bedroom. Beside the cage was a pool of clear water. Inside the cage was a large carved bed made of pure wood. There was something like a bracelet hanging on the bed. That thing was made of pure gold, with intricate patterns on it. It looked exquisite and enchanting, just enough to buckle one's wrist. The side of the bracelet that was close to the skin was inlaid with a layer of rabbit fur, soft and comfortable, and would not hurt when worn. Further inside, there was a dazzling golden piece. A person was lying on the soft bed, his white brocade robe swaying gently in the wind. His picturesque side face was covered with a layer of brilliance. He held an ancient scroll in one hand and supported his head lazily, as if he was very satisfied with this newly made golden cage. The corner of his mouth had a faint smile. His charm was not diminished by the luxurious golden light in the room. On the contrary, he was elegant and charming, taking the full advantage of the romantic. Nangong Lai, who was sitting opposite him, shuddered when he saw his smile. "Aju, are you really going to sleep here in the future?" "Yes," Baligaju responded unhurriedly. Nangong Lai swallowed a mouthful of tea. "Don't you think this thing is too eye-catching? Making a pure gold cage as a bed. Only he could think of it." Baligaju slowly turned a page of the ancient scroll in his hand. "I don't think so." Nangong Lai was speechless. "The point is, what do you want to do with this thing? Don't tell me you really want to lock Hellion Vivian up?" Nangong Lai used to think that he was just joking. Baligaju glanced at him. "What does this have to do with you?" "I'm just curious. Nangong Lai was mentally and physically exhausted. "Most people don't want to be locked up. Aju, you have to understand. No matter how interesting she is in your eyes, it's the same. When she sees this kind of thing, she will definitely run away." The word escape made the light in Bailey Jiaju's eyes turn cold. He slightly stood up, one elbow propped on the chair under his body, the other arm casually rested on his bent knee. It was obviously a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. She won't have that chance. Listening to the movements in the room, the eunuch outside the door had already poked his head in to look many times. He probably wanted to ask when Baligaju was going to take a bath, but he didn't dare to come in. Finally, Baligaju put the scroll beside the pillow and stood up. The servant at the side immediately stepped forward to help him put on his boots. He was dressed in a moon-white rose robe with a large fur coat made of fiery red fox skin draped over it. Just as he was about to change into the White Academy's uniform, he saw a dark shadow pass by and respectfully kneel on the ground. "Your Highness, we have lost track of the person." Baligaju's slender fingers paused and looked towards the shadow. His dark eyes became more and more cold like ice. "Lost her?" Miss Hellion seemed to be preparing to meet someone and only discovered us halfway. After that, she threw off all of our shadows. Shadow hung his head down heavily. Baligaju didn't speak. His white hand threw away the robe. The light outside the window hit his bare waist and spread a thin layer of red. It made him look like a precious ivory sculpture that should be stored in the innermost part of a museum. It was very low-key and luxurious. Nangong Lai analyzed. She must have gone to meet someone important. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thrown them off. Could it be that she went to see Heizei? Aju, did you notice that when we were competing, she and Heizei were acting strangely? Crack. Not waiting for Nangong Lai to finish speaking, the teacup he was holding seemed to be shattered by some invisible force. Nangong Lai opened his mouth and stared blankly. His face was a mess. The tea slid down the side of his face and dripped onto the table. He subconsciously looked toward Bailey Jiaju, only to see that man, who had always been expressionless, punch the wall with the side of his fist. His knuckles overflowed with blood, but he was completely unaware of it. There was still a smile on the corner of his mouth. The wall was full of cracks with uneven lines. A cool breeze swept past, rolling up his ink-black hair like silk. The surrounding space was so cold that it was somewhat inconceivable. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and slightly narrowed his eyes. So intense, not like his style at all. Chapter 2:14. The night grew darker. Hellion Vivian, who everyone thought was hiding because she was afraid of losing face, had already finished the last armament. She reached out and pressed her neck, turning left and right handsomely. Then, looking at the 5 dazzling armaments on the table, she lazily smiled. Where's Heize? He's not here yet? Young master was locked up by master. I'm afraid he won't be able to come out for the next few days. Manager Zhang marveled at the exquisiteness of those armaments. His eyes were filled with emotion. Holding a magnifying glass in his hand, he looked at them from beginning to end. Hellion Vivian smiled and sat down on the wooden chair. Immediately, someone handed her tea. Hellion Vivian thanked the servant, then asked, "Hasn't he been quite well-behaved recently? Why does Master He still dislike him?" It seems that because he did something, the royal family sent people to investigate. Manager Zhang didn't take this matter to heart. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't know that a certain highness would find trouble with Heize. In the future, she would find time to properly talk to a certain highness. He was an ally, so he couldn't casually use a knife. There's still 4 more hours until daybreak. You all should go to sleep. Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand. As if she thought of something, she said, "Oh right, leave 3 spots for me." Manager Zhang frowned. 3 spots? Miss still doesn't want to announce your boss's identity. It's not time yet. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. However, it's still okay to properly enjoy the privilege. When the time comes, I'll bring my friend over. Manager Zhang's face lit up. Miss Friend? Which family's young master, or is it Miss? It's not some young master, right? Hellion Wei lazily yawned. I'm not sure about that person's family background, but his appearance is very attractive. If in the future he's the spokesperson for our martial arts academy, money will definitely drop like a crashing crash. Manager Zhang felt that he didn't understand the big boss's words. Endorsement? Just take our armaments and go out to fight. Hellion Vivian recalled the scene of her deskmate instantly killing the Yuan family's young master in White Academy, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became even wider. He's the kind of person who can control any kind of martial cultivator. When Manager Zhang heard this, his face was filled with astonishment. What kind of martial cultivator can control it? Did such a person still exist in the War Dragon Empire? Logically speaking, martial cultivators and martial artists, martial chi complemented each other. How could there be someone who could control any martial cultivator? Manager Zhang scratched his head. Hellion Vivian was already asleep. Her body was leaning against a wooden chair in a lazy posture. Her long hair fluttered on the golden-colored carpet. Coupled with the fact that she was wearing men's clothing, she really looked like an exquisite and beautiful young man who had walked out of a manga. How could he fall asleep like this? Steward Zhang shook his head, glanced at the servant beside him, and made a shushing gesture. The miss was undoubtedly the most tired today. From the design of the cards to the assembly of the martial cultivators, it was all done by her alone. She didn't even eat a few bites of dinner. She was always busy and busy. Now that she finally had some free time, Manager Zhang didn't disturb her anymore. He retreated with the servant and gave a few instructions to the people below. Manager Zhang looked at the brightly lit auction house. Everywhere was filled with luxury. Every seat here needed to be reserved. The seats at the back cost 10,000 taels, not to mention what kind of status the people sitting in the front row had. This kind of model was unprecedented. In other words, their boss had created another miracle. Only, who would have thought that this miracle was created by the young girl who everyone thought was a good-for-nothing until now? The next day, the capital was in an uproar. Originally, the martial chi competition was about to begin. These 8 big alleys were already filled with people coming and going. Now, because of the martial cultivator auction, it attracted countless martial artists. Some people said that this auction was not the slightest bit inferior to young Master Wu Shuang's auction of martial cultivators. Therefore, in this group of people, not only were there high officials and nobles who wanted to broaden their horizons, there were also various masters in the martial cultivator world. Of course, there were also masters who didn't like the younger generation of profound heavens. After all, they were all at that age and had prestige in the capital. This little brat came. Wasn't he provoking them? No matter from which perspective, Profound Heavens was creating a first-class spectacle. For the sake of participating in this auction, Hellion Jiao especially wore a light purple long skirt. The cuffs were embroidered with the same color decorative designs. Silver threads hooked out several pieces of auspicious clouds, with tassels. Her hair was wrapped in a pure white gauze, contrasting with her even more elegant and beautiful appearance. As soon as she got off the carriage, quite a few people turned to look in her direction. It was a pity that beauties always like to be half-covered, so that they would be more charming. Unfortunately, they wanted to make people unable to see their appearance clearly. Her hand gently held Madame Sue's arm, and she stood at the side like a small and delicate person, watching Madame Sue greet the high officials and nobles who passed by. Those people also wanted to curry favor with Madame Sue, so they didn't mention the part where she was locked up in the temple. Instead, they chatted about all kinds of things, wanting to sit closer to Madame Sue. Therefore, there was no lack of people who wanted to curry favor with her. She pulled Madame Sue's hand and said, "Sister, you're finally here. I heard some time ago that your family has a good relationship with the boss of Profound Heavens. I'm relying on Sister to arrange a good seat." "It's just through letters," Madame Sue said modestly, but her heart was full of pride. She smiled gently and said, "Sister, you also know that I'm not in the capital these days. I can help you arrange a good seat." That person laughed. "What did I say? Sister Mo is the one with the ability." "Okay, let's go in early. The sun outside is scary. My girl's skin has been delicate since she was young. She can't stand the sun." Madame Sue finished speaking and shook her head, but with a subtle sense of superiority. Hearing this, everyone looked at the Hellion Jiaoer. "This is Jiaoer, right? She's really a beauty that can cause the downfall of a city. She's a beauty that can captivate birds and beasts. How can you say that people can't be compared? My girl stays in the house all day long, and she's cultivating in the academy. After cultivating for so long, she still doesn't have a bit of martial chi. Look at Jiaoer. Not only is she beautiful, she's also a genius. I think that this time, she'll surprise everyone again. I heard that there are martial artists from Cloudfall Nation who came specifically for Jiaoer, wanting to compete with her. Even people from Cloudfall Nation know about Jiaoer's fame? That's really not simple." "That's right. I heard that it was Master Wu Shuang who brought them. One is a prince from a neighboring country, and the other is a princess from a neighboring country. They both want to see Jiaoer's face." Chapter 215. I think that whatever princess is jealous. Someone laughed and intimately pinched the Hellion Jiaoer's face. "Look at you. How did you give birth to such a beautiful face? You're going to outshine all the women in the world." "Annie-chan, you're making fun of Jiaoer again." The Hellion Jiaoer shyly lowered her eyes, but the corners of her mouth revealed a complacent smile. The maid standing next to the Hellion Jiaoer also spoke without restraint. "Young miss, you're too kind and too modest. You're obviously the most beautiful." Unexpectedly, as soon as her voice fell, a person walked over from not far away. That person seemed to have just woken up. Her jade-like green left hand held a bamboo umbrella, and under the umbrella was a person wearing a red feathered gown. She walked very lazily, and her long calves were casually exposed. Her long silk-like hair hung unbound on both sides, dark and curly. She had a snow-white oval face without much makeup. Her lips were light and very beautiful, but there was a bright red mole at the corner of her mouth. The knurled gown complemented her snow-white skin. Her eyes were bright and slender, and the corners of her eyes were raised. Her curly hair fell to the side of her ears, and the corner of her mouth had a charming smile. The red gown made this laziness even more stunning. Although the gown was for men, because the person wearing it was too lazy to the bone, and the immortal aura was otherworldly, people could tell at a glance that it was a woman. At that moment, almost everyone sucked in a breath of air. Their eyes didn't turn as they stared at the fairy that appeared out of thin air. Their faces were filled with unprecedented surprise. That person seemed to not notice the gazes around her as she held the umbrella and casually looked at them. The Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands. She was naturally unhappy that such an uninvited guest stole everyone's attention. When she saw the face clearly, she was even more so. "Isn't this that village girl?" the maid blurted out, causing Madame Sue to look over. "What village girl?" Madame Sue looked at the figure in the distance and felt that it was strangely familiar. But when did such a young girl of the same age as her beloved daughter appear in the capital? Why didn't she know it all? Seeing that her miss didn't say anything, the maidservant said, "It's the fairy that was talked about in the capital some time ago." Madame Sue was in the general's residence at that time, so she was naturally affected by this rumor. She had never taken this matter to heart before. After all, she had meticulously raised Jiao since she was a child. Whether it was the hair cream or the rouge, they were all made of ready-made pearls. She wanted her to grow up into a beauty that no one could compare to. How many times had she entered the palace? How many daughters had she seen? None of them were as outstanding as her Jiao. Naturally, she would not believe the rumors that were circulating in the alleyways. But now, it seemed that there really was something in the capital that she didn't know. Madame Sue wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't like this feeling of being out of her control, but even so, she knew what to say in this matter so that her beloved daughter wouldn't be compared. Nowadays, these girls don't know the rules. With that kind of dress, where did they come from? It's a debate. In the future, when you see this kind of person, take the miss and stay away. Do you understand? Although Madame Sue's mouth was scolding the servant girl, in fact, she wanted to express that the woman's origin was unknown. She didn't know where this seductive woman came from, but she couldn't even be compared to her family's Jiao. When the crowd heard this, they followed one after another. Just don't know which ignorant person's soul has been seduced. It's still Jiao who looks. That person originally wanted to say good-looking, but felt that this statement was too hypocritical. Abruptly, she changed it to pure. Hellion Jiao's face was still smiling, but her heart had long since lost the good mood from before. She waited until there was no one else around before she pulled the servant girl over. She used some strength in her fingers and said, "You go and find out for me who that person is. How did he appear here? She's also wearing a robe that looks good." "Yes." The maidservant trembled as she responded, not for anything else, but because of Hellion Jiao's twisted little face. No one had seen the true appearance of the most talented woman in the capital. Only she knew that no matter how cute a person was, when her expression was sinister, it was really frightening. This servant will go and follow her. Wait a moment. Hellion Jiao called her back. Go and ask her what she does. If she's just a lowly wench in the red light district, then give her a sum of money and let her stay far away from the capital. Hellion Jiao had been surrounded by stars for a long time. She simply couldn't tolerate anyone who was prettier than her. Previously, when they met for the first time, Hellion Jiao didn't feel much threat because at that time, her dressing was so unsophisticated that it could drop dregs. She only relied on her good looks, skin, and figure. Right now, Hellion Jiao clearly and distinctly felt that in front of that person, she had fallen by a large step. No, she must make her disappear. Or, before she leaves, make her tell you the secret to whitening her skin. Hellion Jiao's eyes were filled with poison. Ask her what she eats on a daily basis. The maidservant cautiously asked, "What if she doesn't say?" "Then tell her who paid for it." Hellion Jiao raised her chin and laughed coldly. "It's very easy for the general's residence to make someone die quietly." The maidservant felt a chill run down her back and hurriedly responded, "Yes." Then she hurriedly chased in the direction Hellion Vivian had just left. It had to be said that Hellion Jiao was ruined by her own arrogance. If she hadn't looked down on Hellion Vivian before, she wouldn't have failed to recognize the umbrella in Hellion Vivian's hand. Because that wasn't an umbrella at all. Rather, it was the armament that Wei won at Armament City at that time. However, in order to make it more practical, Hellion Vivian had made a few small adjustments later on, so that it had a function that no other armament had. Invisibility. As long as it reached the right temperature and wind direction, this umbrella could automatically create a false airflow, hiding Hellion Vivian, who was holding it. However, its external appearance hadn't changed much. That was why Hellion Jiao had been too careless, because in her heart, Hellion Vivian would always be the ugliest of the ugliest. Hellion Vivian had originally wanted to change her clothes first, then paint her face and go to the academy to find those two guys. She wanted to invite them out to watch the armament auction. In the end, just as she turned a corner, she discovered that there was still a small tail that she hadn't shaken off. Only, this small tail was clearly inferior to the previous person and didn't even know how to hide his presence. Hellion Vivian turned sideways, and her ankle suddenly turned. Chapter 216. The surrounding wind seemed to have a sense of reality as it blew her hair. Her robes fluttered in the wind. Her beauty was peerless. The servant girl didn't expect her to suddenly turn around. She was startled at first, but then she straightened her back. She was clearly young, but she had learned her master's arrogance by 70 to 80%. Woman, isn't this the servant girl of that younger sister of yours who wants to frame you all day long? Why is she following you? Yuan Ming lazily smiled in the Xianhuan space. Hellion Vivian didn't speak. She held the umbrella in her hand, and the cherry blossoms fell. It was a beautiful scene. This made the servant girl feel very uncomfortable, but she didn't forget her young miss's order. She took a step forward and said to Hellion Vivian, "Young miss, which brothel do you belong to?" "Which brothel?" Hellion Vivian repeated this sentence, and a cold light flashed through her eyes. Unfortunately, the servant girl didn't realize it. Or it could be said that she was used to acting like a tyrant by Hellion Zhao's side. She didn't care about the flowers and plants outside, not to mention a prostitute who only had looks. "If you don't want to say, I won't force you." The servant girl put on airs. "I have a banknote worth 10,000 taels. My young miss said that as long as you tell us the secret of how to maintain your skin, this banknote will be yours." "Ah, so someone came to buy you. Woman, I didn't expect you to be so popular." Yuan Ming smiled evilly at the side. Hellion Vivian glanced at the banknote. 10,000 taels? The servant girl thought that she had never seen so much money before. She continued to raise her chin. "That's right." But what she didn't expect was that the other party actually laughed lightly. That laughter seemed to have a little bit of playfulness. 10,000 taels is such a small amount of money. Your young miss can take it out. It's enough to buy a servant girl like you. You. The servant girl was angry. She thought that such a wild woman dared to challenge her, a head servant who came from the general's residence. She immediately sneered. "Do you know who I am? You really want to do this the hard way." Hellion Wei casually glanced at her and allowed her to yell at her side, as if she simply didn't put her in her eyes. Compared to Hellion Vivian's faint smile, the maid's warning did not have any effect. Instead, it became unnecessary noise. When the maidservant saw this, she didn't care about anything else and scolded. "Do you really think you're so valuable? You're just a whore. I'm talking to you. Can't you hear me?" Hellion Vivian looked at her. Suddenly, she tilted her head and smiled. Then, there was a slap. A slap landed on his face. The maidservant was shocked and covered her face in disbelief. She was so angry that her face was distorted. She glared fiercely and screamed, "You dare to hit me! You dare to hit me! You bitch!" "Pa." Hellion Vivian raised her hand again. Her smile was cold and charming. "So what if I hit you? You. I'm going to kill you." The maidservant completely lost her mind. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws at Hellion Vivian. She looked like she wouldn't give up until she beat her to death. Hellion Wei merely smiled. That gloomy and cold aura that she had been concealing started to emit without restraint. Her pair of bright and beautiful eyes were gradually dyed with frost. Suddenly, her finger moved like a dancing butterfly, drawing a curved line that cut through the air. Schwa. The sharp end was firmly pressed against the maidservant's neck. Her movements were so fast that the maidservant didn't have time to react. When she came back to her senses, there was a small cut on her neck. "As long as I use a little bit of force, your artery will be cut open." Hellion Vivian held the umbrella in one hand and the silver knife against the maidservant's neck with the other. The wind blew and lifted her long hair. She smiled like a demon. "When the time comes, it won't be as simple as your face hurting. Your blood will spurt out and get everywhere. Hey, do you want to try? You can say bitched again. I promise you will die a happy death." The maidservant no longer dared to clamor. Her legs had already begun to tremble, and her face was almost blood red. Her entire body sank into extreme fear, and all of a sudden, she went limp on the ground. Hellion Wei Wei looked at her absent-mindedly. Her slender fingers slowly tore the banknote into shreds. Go back and tell your family's young miss. This lord was born beautiful. Even if she wanted to learn, she couldn't. As for the money, don't think that just because the Hellion Jiaoer is rich and powerful, she can do whatever she wants. Teach your maidservants well so that they don't get slapped in the face every day. The flying shredded paper fell. The maidservant watched as the beautiful figure walked further and further away. When her fingers touched the blood on her neck, she was scared out of her wits. She didn't expect this woman to be so powerful. Just now, she didn't even use martial qi, but she suppressed her to the point that she couldn't move at all. But as the Hellion Jiaoer's personal maidservant, she had martial qi and was about to cultivate to the fire level. But she couldn't even beat a person without martial qi. This woman, who is she? The maidservant's face was pale. She ran all the way through the long alley. Her fingers were covering her neck, and she didn't dare to let go. Young Mississippi Hellion Jiaoer turned her head and saw that it was her personal maid who was in this state. Her clothes were even stained with blood. While no one was paying attention, she hurriedly pulled her to the side and frowned. What's going on? The maidservant reported what happened just now to Hellion Jiaoer without missing a word. Her face was ferocious. This servant has never seen such an ungrateful woman. Hellion Jiaoer didn't say anything. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She endured and endured, but in the end, she couldn't hold back anymore. She kicked the maidservant's heart hard. Useless thing. The maidservant was already injured. After being kicked like this, her whole body was lying on the ground. Her qi and blood were churning. The pain in her whole body was simply indescribable. However, no one would be able to see this scene. When Hellion Jiaoer turned around, she had already recovered her usual charming and innocent appearance. She walked into the crowd like a well-bred young lady with outstanding conduct. In her heart, there were no less than 100 thoughts of finding that slut and cutting her into pieces. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable jealousy. As a mother, naturally, Madame Su had long since seen these things. She sent someone to first drag that servant girl away, then walked over and patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand, saying, "How many times have I told you? Nothing else is important. What's important is the results of this time's armament test. Why do you care about a country bumpkin? Just wait. In a moment, when the auction starts, these people will know that only you are worthy of being the center of attention." Chapter 217. Jiaoer understands everything Mother said, but that little bitch is so arrogant. Hellion Jiaoer clenched both of her hands. A malevolent expression appeared on her face. Isn't it just a good-looking face? Just wait and see when I'll scratch up that slut's face. Su Yinamo pulled her over, looked at her left and right, pinched her and said, "Jiaoer, how many times have I told you? You have to watch your words and actions. You are the most favored lady of the Defense Division, the apple of your father's eye, and the future master of the Eastern Palace. So many pairs of eyes are watching you, hoping to find the slightest mistake, even more so now. You have to remember, even if you are angry, don't show it in front of others, understand?" Hellion Jiaoer also knew that her face didn't look too good, but she was still angry in her heart, yet she didn't dare to disobey her mother's words. She shook Madame Su's arm and acted like a spoiled child as she stuck her face close to her. "Daughter understands." Madame Su stroked her beloved daughter's long hair, her eyes shining. "You don't have to be so calculative about that person's appearance. Isn't she just a village girl? Tomorrow, find a few people to find out her name and ruin her. Not just scratch her face, but ruin it. More ruthless than Hellion Jiaoer." "Mother is right. I won't make a fuss." Hellion Jiaoer curved her thin lips, the corners of her mouth forming a vicious smile. She knew her mother's methods better than anyone else. If her mother said to ruin that person, there was no possibility of that person rising again. However, this pair of mother and daughter had never thought that. Just like what Hellion Vivian said, money and power were not enough to cover the sky. There were always many variables in this world, and Hellion Vivian's real identity was the cause of many variables. The sky was clear. There were no clouds in sight. The wind blew gently. The emerald green pine and cypress supported the water droplets, the branches swaying. When the branches could no longer bear the weight of the water droplets, only then did they slightly press down on the branches. Snap! Dew hit her face. At this time, Wei Wei had already changed her makeup and wore White Academy's uniform. She looked all around, yet didn't find the two people she was looking for. That was strange. Could it be that they were also on vacation? Hellion Vivian, who had returned without any success, didn't waste any more time on this. Seeing that no one was around, she simply walked out. Such an entry and exit made everyone's guess even more. Look, she actually came back. Coming back at this time, you must have forgotten something. It seems so, but some guys are really exaggerated. They call her boss the moment they see her. That's enough. It's just those people from the good compound who haven't seen the world and are blindly joining in the fun. Some people probably haven't tasted the feeling of being praised before, so they're doing this on purpose. It's as if they're showing off how powerful they are and how popular they are. Originally, when Wei Wei saw those little brothers that she'd accepted, she wanted to give out 2 of the seat tickets in her hand before stopping. Who knew that before they even started chatting? Those young ladies from the big families who'd gathered together to practice martial chi saw her as an eyesore. They wholeheartedly thought that she was fighting for a position and looked down on her. After all, no matter how she thought about it, they were stronger than her. This woman's martial chi was indeed good, but what was the use of that? A bad family background was fatal. Furthermore, she didn't have the slightest bit of martial chi. Those people should be surrounding them. Why were they so blind as to surround a country bumpkin? Hellion Vivian understood that this was all caused by jealousy. She crossed her arms and looked at them with an evil smile. The person standing beside her was also a straightforward person. Chunny Feng, who was from the general's estate, spoke with a reckless spirit. Are you done? You're always chattering. Other than speaking ill of others, what else can you do? Just based on this point, you can't compare to boss. Yes. Your boss is an influential figure. One of them laughed mockingly. After all, there isn't anyone who can't even score a point in the martial chi class. Even the Hellion family couldn't help but kick her out of the family tree. Relying on her little martial chi attainments, she thinks that she's invincible. In the end, when the martial chi test came, she revealed her true colors. I don't understand. We're both from the general's estate, but Miss Jiao Air is very kind. Even when she went to Profound Heaven's auction, she didn't make a fuss. If your boss really has the ability, she should also go to the auction and stroll around. Sister, what are you saying? Aren't you making things difficult for our eldest miss? With all of her belongings, it's estimated that she can't buy a seat in the last row of the auction. You shouldn't make things difficult for a poor student. The ladies from the noble families talked back and forth, waving their fans at each other and mocking with fake smiles. You all shut up for me. The more Chani Feng listened, the angrier he got. He also studied martial arts. After he lost to Hellion Vivian, he was convinced. People like them who studied martial arts, in addition to talent, also paid attention to dexterity. Not everyone could learn martial arts, not to mention how difficult it was to sell those materials. And their boss was the most awesome. Even if ordinary materials, in her hands, could be turned into a top-notch martial art, these people with eyes at the top of their heads simply didn't know what this meant for the martial arts world. They even ridiculed their boss for not having money. If their boss had money, the martial arts she made would definitely be sold like hotcakes. It can't be, young Master Chin, you want to fight with us for her? Someone sized up Chan Yifeng with a glance. I say, young Master Chin, you shouldn't have some shameful thoughts about your boss, right? For example, you want to marry your boss or something like that. After the words fell, another burst of laughter. Among them, a lady from an aristocratic family laughed until tears came out. She pointed at Chinny Feng and Hellion Vivian and said, "You don't say, their skin color is actually quite similar. I just don't know if in the future when they give birth to a child, it won't be a little black coal ball, right?" Chinny Feng exploded with a bang. He wanted to rush over and have a good fight. Hellion Vivian pressed down on his wrist. It seemed that she didn't use much strength, but it made Shan Yifeng turn his head in surprise. His eyes flashed with deep astonishment. He knew that although their boss's skill was good, she didn't have a foundation. It was said that when she had just entered the academy, she won that match. Because at that time, Hellion May's performance wasn't very good. Of course, he didn't know what was going on in that match. After all, what the match was really like, only the competitors themselves knew. But at that time in the crystal ball test, their boss clearly didn't even have the ability to ignite the crystal ball. But why did she just lightly put her hand on his arm? He felt a strength he had never felt before. This didn't seem like the strength of a person without martial qi. Chapter 218. Chen Yifeng looked at Hellion Vivian in disbelief. Hellion Vivian just smiled, with 30% evil charm and 70% playfulness. Her eyes met the ridicule of those rich young masters and young ladies. It turns out that the Profound Heavens auction location is so popular. Of course, those people glanced at her arrogantly. Don't tell me you don't know what Profound Heavens is? Come to think of it, a person like you, I'm sure you haven't even seen Profound Heavens before. Chun Yifeng's eyes were red. Our boss really wants to see Profound Heavens armaments. Grandmaster Zi Zun's armaments are also top-notch. Haha, a country bumpkin is a country bumpkin. Really can't communicate. That person held a handkerchief. I say, sisters, let's not waste time here. Let's see if we can buy a seat in the back row through Miss Jiao Air. There's no need to think about the front row. It must have already been booked. These words are true. I heard that the auction won't start until tonight. Let's go ask for leave now and let Miss Jiao Air take us in. How about it? I think it's okay. A group of people laughed and talked, walking together in the direction of the superior compound. Even some of the people who were surrounding Hellion Wei just now also awkwardly changed sides at the last minute. This kind of phenomenon actually often appeared in modern times, forming cliques to squeeze people out. It was probably because they looked down on Hellion Vivian from the bottom of their hearts. Like those people said, she didn't have power and influence, so she was doomed to be criticized no matter what she did. But those people probably never thought that they would regret this decision so much in the near future. Hellion Vivian glanced at the people around her. In addition to Chen Yifeng, there were 2 girls and a boy. Among the 2 girls, one of them made Hellion Vivian raise her eyebrows. When she looked at her, there was a touch of light in her eyes. This is the childhood sweetheart that He Zhe, that guy, didn't dare to confess to? Nalan Hongye saw Hellion Vivian looking at her. She raised her eyes and was very forthright. What's wrong? Are you interested in coming with me? Hellion Wei's words were interrogative, but she didn't give the other party the slightest chance to refuse. Her fingers grasped Nalan Hongye's wrist. She had to bring this along. She was the future young madam of the He family, so what if she took Zhang Wei Zhe's world's tickets? In a moment, when they arrived at the shop, she would tell manager Zhang to put all the bills on He Zhe. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that it was a good idea. The smile on her face grew wider. Yes, Nalan Hongye had never seen such a woman before. Her smile only made people feel comfortable. She didn't have the subtle gaze that others looked at her. She had always done things like a man, and there were many old men in her family, so she had been raised as a man since she was young. To be honest, she really couldn't understand women. All right, even though she was also a woman. But for example, when they were eating together, their conversation would always revolve around Hellion Vivian. She didn't want to participate in this kind of conversation. These people gradually alienated her. Bastard. She just wanted to be a beautiful girl who ate quietly. Was it so difficult? Also, those letters written to He Zhe, could they always be sent to her? Being sent letters like this by so many girls would affect her marriage in the future. What's more, every time she told He Zhe about this kind of thing, He Zhe would only give her a cold laugh. He even said that if she sent such letters to the He residents again, she should never see him again. Then, when she didn't see him, he got angry and said that she had no conscience. He was already locked up, but she didn't know to send him food. Why did she always feel that Heizei was the same as those women? They were all like needles at the bottom of the sea, very difficult to find. One moment he was like this, the next moment he was like that. It really made her very puzzled. Hellion Vivian looked at Nalan Hongye's side face. She didn't think that this girl would leave with her so easily. She thought that the other party would more or less dislike her because of Heizei's actions. She didn't expect that. It was unexpectedly interesting. You're not going to ask me where I'm taking you? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Nalan Hongye's small face was handsome, expressionless. I'm familiar with Siju City. I can attest to this point. Chunifeng raised his hand at the side. The people she knows are all local tyrants. The armaments they make are also very powerful. It's just that I don't know why she was assigned to the good compound. Nalan Hongye turned her head to look at Chunifeng and asked in bewilderment, How do you know me so well? Chunifeng's face reddened. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian, however, understood, especially when Nalan Hongye had a baby face that everyone loved. Her skin was so tender that it could drip water. She was also not spoiled. This kind of girl, if someone discovered her good points, they would be deeply in love with her. Only, she couldn't help but say that Heizei's move was good. It should be adjusted. Otherwise, if his sweetheart ran away with someone else, let's see how he would continue acting. Heizei didn't let me go to the good compound. He said that seeing me would make him upset. Nalan Hongye's eyes turned. It's probably my temperament that made him lose face. Who told me to not know how to judge people? Hellion Wei paused. Her beautiful phoenix-shaped eyes looked up. She discovered that this girl wasn't as clueless as she appeared on the surface. She understood everything, so much so that she could see more clearly than anyone else. She just didn't want to participate. You can come to our inferior compound to play. I'm usually bored by myself. Hellion Wei walked forward while chuckling as she looked at the girl in her hand. Apart from attending classes seriously, there's no other entertainment. Chunifeng, Nalan Hongye. Attending classes seriously. Was it really appropriate for someone who slept all day to the point that even the teacher wanted to remove her name from the class? Right, boss. Where are we going? Nalan Hongye didn't want to know, but they also wanted to know. After all, asking for leave was too extravagant for them. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and said lightly, We're also going to Profound Heavens. Another 2 hours passed. After the sunset, the show began. The streets were bustling with people coming and going, and there was an endless stream of horses and carriages. There were people who made sugar figures, sold rouge and powder, and fortune-telling people. The capital was originally the most prosperous capital of the Dragon War Empire. It was densely populated and luxurious. Now, the streets of Chang'an were even more crowded. Probably the most luxurious carriages in the capital were gathered in front of Profound Heavens, waiting to enter. Inside, there were also quite a few people wearing White Academy's uniform. From a distance, no matter how one looked at it, there were at least 6 or 7 people. There were both men and women surrounding Hellion Jiao Air's side, chatting and laughing, hoping that Hellion Jiao Air would lead them inside. Hellion Jiao couldn't not see their thoughts, but spending some money was nothing to her. What's more, these people's fathers were also useful in the imperial court, so Hellion Jiao didn't refuse at all. She was generous as if Profound Heavens was her family's. Chapter 219. Boss, are we really going there? Chunifeng looked at the sea of people in the distance and was somewhat hesitant. It was not that he couldn't take out the money, but he was worried that someone would say something bad to attack his boss. Moreover, he heard that the seats in the Profound Heaven auction house were very popular. Some time ago, even his old man said that he would find a way to get one for him. He felt that his boss was powerful enough. There was no need to look at other people. Although the armaments of Profound Heaven were indeed good, but there was a suspicion of deliberately creating momentum. However, the boss of Profound Heaven was the first person in many years to create such momentum. He also heard the old man say something about brand effect. He didn't even understand what they were saying, but he knew that the other party was very powerful. Profound Heavens was the first person who could make the entire War Dragon Empire's people feel itchy, making people feel that having a martial art was equivalent to having a unique identity. That's why everyone fought to enter. Aside from the martial cultivators themselves, what they wanted was to display their nobility at this kind of time. If their boss went, wouldn't she be ridiculed by those people? The clever Hellion Vivian, of course, saw Chen Yifeng's worry. She hooked her lips and smiled. Don't worry, profound heaven is not as difficult to enter as you think. Chen Yifeng grabbed his hair and couldn't express the helplessness in his heart. Boss, this matter is not as simple as you think. But what he didn't expect was that there were people who agreed with such a statement. Well, it's really not that difficult to enter. Nalan Hongya thought about it, then reached out and took out the silver card on her body. Her voice was faint. Actually, I have 2 positions here. Hellion Vivian didn't need to think to know where her silver card came from. Someone couldn't help but make a move tomorrow. Hey, really hit it deep? Silver card. Chen Yifeng looked a little dizzy. You actually have a silver card of profound heaven? When did Nalan family have such a big power? Even the defense department didn't get a silver card. Nalan Hongya asked with a serious face. Is it difficult to have this? Heize gave me 5 at once. But she only took 1 out. No, it's not difficult at all. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. However, it was a little too light of a punishment for someone who couldn't distinguish between public and private matters. She seemed to have thought of something, and the corners of her lips curled up. Yi Zi, do you mind if we switch positions later? Nalan Hongya was very straightforward. I don't mind. Anyway, He Xiaoza has been locked up by the old man recently. He probably can't come out even if he wants to. Heh. In order to be able to watch an armament test alone with you, even if he had to crawl into a dog's kennel, he would still crawl out. However, Hellion Vivian smiled evilly. Disobedient employees always needed to be knocked and pinched so that they would not often go crazy in the future and get close to her from time to time. Don't think that she's a fool. Just because she doesn't say it doesn't mean that she doesn't know. In the past, He Eyes had wanted to make use of her and get close to her. It was probably because he had just entered the academy at that time and didn't understand the various rules of the academy. In addition, there were too many girls in the academy, so it was inevitable that jealousy would arise from admiration. She reckoned that He Eyes also wanted to find someone to divert these people's attention. Coincidentally or not, she became that gun handle. For example, that Chen Wenwan, because she obviously liked He Eyes, she came to frame her. That's why it's said that a blue face is more deadly than a femme fatale. It was because of this that He Eyes deliberately distanced himself from Nalan Hongya and turned around to get close to her. Hellion Vivian had long seen through this layer, but didn't say anything. Firstly, it was because she felt that the feelings of childhood sweethearts were more precious. Although she didn't really approve of He Eyes' method, she couldn't deny that to some extent, it could indeed protect another person. Of course, she wasn't Mother Mary, sacrificing herself in order to protect someone. The main reason was that she was already standing on the cusp of the storm, so she didn't care if there was one more. Arguing with He Eyes about this wasn't enough time to waste. Secondly, He Eyes treated her pretty well. She wasn't an ungrateful person. Having this brother, she naturally stood on the same line. But occasionally giving him a small punishment to let him know how powerful she was also necessary. Moreover, she really wanted to see what that playboy young Master He, who had never put anyone in his eyes, would look like when he was jealous. Nalan Hongya didn't know what Hellion Vivian was thinking. Chen Yifeng and the other 2 students didn't even catch their breath and didn't even follow up with the conversation. It was obviously very difficult to get those silver cards, okay? Nalan Hongya even got 5 at once. That was practically better treatment than the royal family. Why does young Master He have so many silver cards? Chen Yifeng was impulsive and rash, but his brain wasn't stupid. Could it be that he has some kind of relationship with Profound Heaven's boss? Hellion Vivian glanced at him indifferently, smiling faintly. You can ask He Eyes this question when you have the chance. It's almost time. Let's go first. Chen Yifeng was still a bit dizzy, his head swelling as he followed Hellion Vivian and the rest into the crowd. Look who's here. Why is she here? Don't tell me that these people also came to the auction to watch the auction. The few students who had previously ridiculed Hellion Wei Wei and the others in the academy looked at them with amused eyes, especially when they looked at Hellion Wei Wei. Disdain was clearly written on their faces. Hellion Jiaoer also saw Hellion Vivian and the rest of the group. She frowned. Big sister? What is this bitch doing here? Big sister? When the surrounding madams heard Hellion Jiaoer's address, they all turned to look at Hellion Wei Wei's direction. They only saw a young girl with a dark face standing there. The clothes on her body were also made of the most common materials. Looking left and right, there wasn't a single piece that was presentable. Sister Sue, this is your adopted eldest daughter. It's really better to see her than to hear about her 100 times. Look at her, hee. It had to be said that hee was an all-encompassing word, not only in modern times, but also in ancient times. Everyone knew that Su Yinamo looked down on Hellion Vivian from the bottom of her heart. After all, the Hellion family was a famous beauty in the entire Dragon War Empire. There was even a rumor that she would marry the neighboring country's emperor. But no one knew what happened, and in the end, Hellion Guangyao became the son-in-law of the Hellion family. At that time, no one knew who the Su family was. If the Hellion family hadn't changed hands, Su Yinamo probably wouldn't have been able to match up to the Hellion family. Chapter 220. However, sometimes, it was not good for a woman to be too capable. No matter how powerful the Hellion family was, in the end, she was still unable to protect herself in her old age. Her husband was snatched away, and the family property was taken away. Now, the one who called the shots was not the one from the Hellion family, but Su Yinamo. Compared to that one, they preferred Su Yinamo. She was a stubborn person and always looked like a flower on a high mountain. She thought that she was great because she had fought a few battles, but when she returned to the capital, her reputation was still ruined by them. If they were to say, she was a stupid girl. Now, looking at her daughter's way of doing things, it was not much better. If she did not have any talents, she should just stay at home and not come out. She did not even see what kind of occasion it was today, and she still rushed to the front. The point was, did she think she could do it? Some of the ladies looked at Hellion Vivian arrogantly, as if they were looking at a clown. They thought that since they had not entered the scene yet, they might as well have some fun. I say, Wei Wei, your name is Wei Wei, right? How's your marriage going? Do you need us to introduce someone to you, so that your mother won't have to worry about you? Before Hellion Vivian could say anything, Su Yinamo interrupted. It would be great if there is a suitable one. If this child does not have a husband for the rest of her life, I don't know how much my sister will hate me in the afterlife. Little sister Sue, you're just too kind. Don't worry, I happen to have a pretty good one here. He just came back from the battlefield, but his legs are a little inconvenient. But Wei Wei, you should also understand that at your age, plus the previous incident, it's already good enough that someone can marry you back home. After saying that, that person sighed. Of course, it would also depend on whether the other side is willing to accept you. After all, you have no talents and no looks. It would be hard for me to explain to them. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She was smiling from beginning to end, but that smile did not reach her eyes. That's too scary. Someone actually dares to introduce men to you. Yuan Ming rubbed his arms. Aren't they afraid that you'll beat the other party until half of their body is paralyzed? Moreover, with a missing leg, they probably won't even be able to do that. Woman, it seems that some people think that you're worthless and want to deal with you cheaply. Chen Yifeng's family had a general before, so he had heard a little about this person who had just returned from the battlefield. When he heard the madam's words, he frowned. Isn't that person already in his 50s? You want our boss to marry an old man in his 50s? What a rotten old man. That's a general with outstanding military service. The madam didn't like Chen Yifeng either. She glanced at Hellion Vivian and said, Wei Wei, it's not that I want to criticize you, but you're an unmarried girl. How can you hang around with men all day long? How can you be so rude to me? I'm your elder. Hellion Vivian laughed. She picked her ears with her fingers and said, I was wondering why the sound was so harsh to my ears. It turns out that it's because people have been barking non-stop. Also, Auntie, who are you? Am I close to you? You came up and said that you want to introduce a husband to me. Do you think you're so important? You. You. The madam was so angry that she kept hitting her own chest with her handkerchief. I've never seen such an ungrateful girl. Madame Sue pretended to be red in the face. Sister, calm down. It's Wei Wei who doesn't know the rules and doesn't understand our good intentions. All these years, I've been scratching my head. Think about it, sister. You should know that it's not that I, Su Yinamo, don't not care. It's just that I can't control her. As she said this, she let out a long sigh and looked like she was about to cry from being wronged. When the people around them heard these words, they started to point at Hellion Wei Wei one after another. When Madame Sue saw this, she felt relieved. Thinking about the humiliation she had suffered in the Hidden Spirit Temple this time, she had never suffered before. Now, she could finally vent her disgust. What she wanted to see was to let this little bastard be condemned by everyone. Other than revenge, of course, Madame Sue had other plans. The auction was about to start. She received news that the retired emperor would be coming. Last time, she heard from Zhao Air that this little bastard used them to curry favor with the retired emperor. That was why the retired emperor was so angry. Calculating the time, the retired emperor should be arriving by now. He was most likely sitting in the tea house opposite. The environment there was good, and the view was good. If it wasn't for the high officials and nobles of the capital, it was impossible to book a seat there on this day. Su Yinmo's guess was right. There was indeed someone sitting in the tea house. The retired emperor, dressed in a Chinese brocade robe, sat in the most important seat. He held a purple jade teacup in his hand. Between his eyebrows, there were traces of power left behind by years of mingling in a high position. Although his eyebrows were smiling, it gave people a sense of oppression without being angry. On his left and right sat 4 men. All of them were handsome and had extraordinary manners. Of course, the most outstanding one was the third prince, dressed in a white robe and purple muslin. Beligaju. His elbows casually rested on the carved wooden chair, and his slender, white fingers lazily propped up the side of his face. His finely crafted white robe fluttered in the wind, and his ink-black hair fluttered, revealing his handsome face that was both good and evil. The light of the setting sun faintly shone on his body through the wooden window, outlining his perfect figure in varying shades of light. Sitting opposite him was the heir of the Murong Palace, Murong Changfeng. Compared to Bailey Jiaju's coldness and indifference, his eyes were filled with appropriate gentleness, not too much, not too little, and not too much. He wore a brocade cloak with a navy blue cloud-embroidered robe. His eyes watched the scene below, and he sneered. Now that woman should know how difficult it was for her to marry someone other than him. Although he didn't like to see anyone treat her like this, it was more important than anything that there was someone who could let her see this clearly. Eunuch Sun, who was standing beside him, was not as magnanimous as Murong Changfeng. Ever since he heard the words below, he wanted to go out and stop it, but the retired emperor had an attitude of wanting to listen. Therefore, no matter how anxious Eunuch Sun was, he could only stand to the side and look at his master's faint smile. He thought of His Highness's face, but he was still wearing a mask. If he took off the mask, who knew how cold it would be? In this way, someone was going to be unlucky, regardless of what Hellion Vivian meant to His Highness. But in front of His Highness, she was so brazenly introducing her husband to His Highness's favorite princess. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.